Sometimes the hardest thing about getting older isn't what you've lost, it's what you've learned to live with. For 58-year-old Greer Manton, that meant 10 years alone in the mountains with her dog Tip, far from the town that stopped asking questions a long time ago. She knew every trail, every bend in the cold river that ran through the pines. On a grey October morning, Tip suddenly bolted toward the water, barking harder than she'd heard in years. When Greer reached the riverbank, something broke the surface. It wasn't a body, but it was enough to pull her straight back to a night 30 years ago that everyone agreed to forget. What floated up in that river? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Greer's hands shook as she pulled the rusted metal box from the river's edge, water streaming from its corroded seams. The weight of it felt wrong, too heavy for something that had been submerged long enough to accumulate that much rust. Tip circled her legs, whining low in his throat, the kind of sound he made when thunder was coming. But the sky was clear, just that flat grey October sky that seemed to press down on the mountains this time of year. She tucked the box under her arm and started back up the trail, her breath coming harder than it should. 10 years in these mountains, and she still wasn't used to the altitude, or maybe it was just age catching up with her. 58 wasn't old, not really. But it felt old when you spent most of your time alone with your thoughts and a dog who was getting grey around the muzzle himself. The cabin appeared through the pines, small and weathered but solid. She'd bought it with the last of her savings after Dennis left, after the divorce papers came through, and she realized she had nothing keeping her in Alder Creek anymore. Nothing except the questions that nobody wanted to answer, and the memories that nobody wanted to discuss. Up here, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and 7 from town, she could at least pretend that the silence was her choice. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood smoke and coffee, the kind of lived-in smell that comes from routine. She set the box on the kitchen table, pulled off her jacket, and stood there looking at it. Tip settled by the wood stove, watching her with those dark eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog should. The box wasn't locked. The lock had rusted through years ago, leaving just a broken hasp hanging loose. Greer filled the kettle and set it on the stove, buying herself time. She knew what this box was. She'd known the moment she saw it break the surface of the water, the way you know a face even after 30 years, even when it's changed. Her sister Jolene had owned a box just like this, kept it under her bed in the room they'd shared, growing up in their parents' house down in town. Jolene had been 25 when she disappeared, full of plans and secrets, and that restless energy that young people have when they think the whole world is waiting for them. Greer had been 28, newly married to Dennis, wrapped up in her own life and her own future. Too wrapped up to notice when her little sister started pulling away, started taking phone calls late at night and driving off without saying where she was going. The kettle whistled. Greer made herself a cup of tea, added honey from the jar on the counter, and sat down at the table. The box sat there between her and the window, between her and the view of the mountains she'd come here to escape into. She opened it. The smell hit her first, that particular odor of old paper and rust and river water. Inside, everything was waterlogged but still recognizable. A photograph, the colors faded to ghosts of themselves. 3 young people at what looked like a summer festival, cotton candy and carnival lights blurred in the background. Jolene in the middle, her arm around a tall boy with dark hair. On her other side, a girl Greer didn't recognize, laughing at something off camera. Greer lifted the photograph carefully. Underneath it, wrapped in what had once been a plastic bag, was a tarnished locket on a thin chain. She remembered that locket. Their grandmother had given it to Jolene for her 16th birthday. Jolene never took it off, said it brought her luck. There were papers, too, folded tight and stuck together with moisture and time. Greer didn't try to separate them, not yet. They'd need to dry out or they'd tear. But she could see handwriting through the translucent paper. Jolene's rounded script that always looked like it was hurrying somewhere. The last thing in the box was a key. small and brass, the kind that might open a diary or a desk drawer. Nothing remarkable about it except that it was here, in this box, at the bottom of the river where her sister had disappeared 3 decades ago. Greer set the photograph on the table and studied it. The summer of 1995. She remembered that summer, remembered Jolene being secretive and happy in a way that worried their mother. Remembered coming home from work one evening and hearing Jolene on the phone in their old room, her voice low and urgent. Greer had meant to ask about it later, but later never came. 2 weeks after that, Jolene didn't come home one night. The next morning, her car was found abandoned on the old logging road near the mill. The doors were open, the keys still in the ignition. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no note. Just gone. Sheriff Vincent Pardee had investigated. He was younger then, still had ambition and the kind of confidence that came from never having failed at anything important. He'd questioned everyone, Greer, their parents, Jolene's friends, the people she worked with at the diner. He'd searched the woods, dragged parts of the river, put out alerts across 3 counties. After 6 weeks, he'd sat in their parents' living room and told them he'd done everything he could. Sometimes people just leave, he said. Sometimes they don't want to be found. Their mother never believed it. She died 4 years later, and Greer always thought it was grief that killed her more than the cancer. Their father lasted another 3 years after that, drinking himself quiet in front of the television until his heart gave out. By then, Dennis was already pulling away, tired of living with a wife who couldn't let go of her sister's ghost. The divorce was civil. They didn't have children, didn't have much to divide except the house and some savings. Greer took her half and left. She told herself she was moving up here for the peace and quiet, for the chance to start over. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. She'd come to the mountains because down in Alder Creek, every street corner and storefront reminded her of Jolene. Every time she saw a woman with dark hair and Jolene's build, her heart would jump. Up here, there was nobody to remind her. Nobody to look at her with pity or curiosity or that particular kind of judgment people reserve for those who can't move on. Tip lifted his head, sensing her mood. Greer reached down and scratched behind his ears. She'd found him 6 years ago, half-starved and limping on a torn paw pad, probably dumped by someone who didn't want to deal with an injured dog. She'd patched him up, fed him, and he'd decided to stay. They understood each other, she and Tip. Both of them had been left behind by people who should have cared more. The afternoon light was fading. Greer stood and moved around the cabin, lighting the oil lamp she kept for when the generator cut out, feeding the wood stove, the familiar rituals that marked the transition from day to evening. She made herself dinner, venison stew from the freezer, bread she'd baked 2 days ago, the last of the early apples sliced thin with cinnamon. She ate at the table with the box, and its contents spread out before her, thinking, someone had put this box in the river. Maybe recently, maybe years ago. The current up here was strange, full of eddies and deep pools where things could sink and stay sunk for decades, then work free during spring floods or when the river shifted course. It could have been down there since 1995, or it could have gone in last month. There was no way to know. Without asking questions, she wasn't sure she was ready to ask, but the box was here now. Whatever it meant, whoever had hidden it or lost it or thrown it away, it had come back. Tip had found it, or it had found her. And either way, she was holding her sister's locket in her hand and looking at her sister's face in a photograph she'd never seen before. The tall boy in the picture. Dark hair, strong features, an easy smile. Greer leaned closer, studying him in the lamplight. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at memory. And then it clicked. Kyle Brennan, the mill owner's son. He died that same summer, 2 weeks before Jolene vanished. Fallen from the old water tower at the mill, they said. Tragic accident. The whole town had turned out for his funeral. Greer sat back, her mind working through the implications. She'd never known Jolene and Kyle were close. Never heard anyone mention them together. But here was the photograph. Jolene's arm around his waist, his around her shoulders. Both of them looking happy and young, and completely unaware that in a few weeks they'd both be gone outside. The wind picked up. sending pine needles rattling against the windows. The temperature was dropping fast. Greer banked the fire and pulled the blanket off the back of the couch, wrapping it around her shoulders. Tip moved to his bed in the corner, circling twice before settling with a sigh. She couldn't stop looking at the photograph. Couldn't stop thinking about Jolene in those last weeks, how she'd seemed distracted and jumpy, how she'd argued with someone on the phone that night Greer had assumed it was a boyfriend, some drama that would blow over. She'd been too focused on her own life, her new marriage, the house she and Dennis were fixing up. She'd told herself Jolene was an adult, could handle her own problems. That was the guilt that lived in her now, that had lived in her for 30 years. The guilt of not paying attention when it mattered, of being so wrapped up in her own happiness that she missed the warning signs. If she'd pressed Jolene about the phone call, about where she was going, about who she was seeing, would it have made a difference? Would Jolene still be here? There was no answer to that. There never had been. But now there was this box, and the photograph, and the locket, and the key. Evidence that something had happened, that Jolene hadn't just decided to disappear. Evidence that maybe, after 30 years, it wasn't too late to find out what. Greer picked up the papers again, carefully separating the top sheet from the others. The ink had run, but she could make out fragments. "Meet me at the old mill." "Don't tell." The handwriting wasn't Jolene's. It was angular, masculine, rushed. A date at the bottom, August 14th, 1995, 3 days before Kyle Brennan died. 4 days before Jolene vanished. The paper trembled in her hands. For 10 years, she'd lived up here in silence, accepting that some questions don't have answers, that some losses you just have to carry. But holding this note, looking at her sister's face in the photograph, feeling the weight of the locket in her palm, something shifted inside her. A decision forming before she even knew she was making it. Tomorrow she would go into town. Tomorrow she would start asking the questions that nobody had wanted to answer 30 years ago. She didn't know what she'd find, didn't know if anyone would even talk to her after all this time. But she knew she couldn't let this go. Not anymore. She was 58 years old, and she'd spent the last decade learning to live with silence and solitude. But some silences need to be broken. Some truths need to be spoken, no matter how long they've been buried. Greer carefully gathered the contents of the box, wrapped them in a clean towel, and set them on the shelf above her desk. She'd let them dry overnight, examine them more carefully in the morning. Then she'd drive down the mountain and into Alder Creek for the first time in 4 months. She'd walk into the diner where Sheriff Pardee took his coffee every morning. Retired now, but still keeping to his routines. Still, the man who'd closed her sister's case and told her family to move on, and she'd show him what the river had given back. Outside, the mountains settled into darkness, and the river ran on through the pines, cold and constant, keeping its secrets until someone was finally ready to listen. Morning came cold and clear. Greer was up before dawn, unable to sleep past the restless hours that had carried her through the night. She'd spent most of it at the kitchen table, carefully separating the papers from the box, laying them out on clean towels to dry. The note she'd glimpsed the night before was clearer now in the lamplight. "Meet me at the old mill. Midnight. Don't tell VP Vincent Pardee." The handwriting was definitely masculine, probably Kyle's based on the date and context. But why would Kyle Brennan be warning Jolene not to tell the sheriff about a meeting? And what happened at that meeting that ended with both of them dead within days? Greer made coffee and sat with the questions until the sun came up over the ridge. Then she showered, dressed in clean jeans and the fleece pullover that Dennis had given her years ago, back when he still thought their marriage might survive her grief. She fed Tip, left him with fresh water and strict instructions to guard the cabin, and headed for her truck. The drive down the mountain took 40 minutes on the winding dirt road that turned to gravel, then finally to pavement as she reached the outskirts of Alder Creek. The town hadn't changed much in the months since her last visit. Same main street with its handful of shops, same diner with the red neon sign, same gas station on the corner. Population 847, according to the sign at the town limits. Probably fewer now. Young people didn't stay in places like this anymore. Greer parked in front of Trudeau's diner and sat for a moment, gathering her nerve. Through the window she could see the familiar interior. Red vinyl booths, laminate counter, coffee pot on the warmer. And there, in the corner booth, sat Vincent Pardee. Even from here she recognized his profile, the slope of his shoulders, the way he held his coffee cup with both hands. She grabbed the towel-wrapped bundle from the passenger seat and went inside. The bell over the door jingled. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Faye Trudeau looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from welcoming to wary in the space of a heartbeat. A few of the regulars, men in work jackets and ball caps, glanced at Greer, then quickly away. She'd forgotten this feeling, the way small towns closed ranks around their own discomfort. Vincent Pardee set down his coffee cup and watched her approach. He was 73 now, she knew. Retired for 8 years, but still sharp-eyed, still carrying himself like a man who'd worn a badge most of his life. His hair had gone completely white, and there were deep lines bracketing his mouth. But he was still recognizable as the man who'd sat in her parents' living room and told them there was nothing more he could do. "Greer," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while. Sheriff. Old habits." She'd never gotten comfortable calling him anything else. Just Vincent now. "I haven't been sheriff in a long time." He gestured to the seat across from him. "You look well." She sat, keeping the bundle in her lap. "I found something yesterday, up by my place, in the river." His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Caution, maybe, or recognition. What kind of something? Greer unwrapped the towel and set the metal box on the table between them. The papers were still inside, along with the photograph and the locket. She watched his face as he looked at them, watched the color drain from his cheeks. "Where did you get this?" His voice was quieter now. "I told you. The river. My dog found it caught in the roots where the water runs deep." Pardee reached for the photograph, then seemed to think better of it. His hands retreated to his coffee cup. "That's been missing a long time." "Missing, not lost." "I didn't say lost." "No, you didn't." Greer pulled out the note, the one with his initials. "Care to explain this?" He read it, his jaw tightening. For a long moment he said nothing. Around them the diner had gone quiet. Faye was wiping the same section of counter over and over, not looking at them but clearly listening. "You need to let this go." "Greer, that's what you told my parents 30 years ago, and I'll tell you the same thing now." He pushed the box back toward her, his voice low and urgent. "Whatever you think you've found, it's not going to bring Jolene back. It's not going to change anything. It might change what I know about what happened to her. What happened was a tragedy. A young woman who made poor choices and paid for them." The words hit like a slap. Greer felt her hands curl into fists under the table. "Poor choices. Is that what we're calling it now? I'm saying that some things are better left buried, like evidence. Like the fact that Kyle Brennan wrote this note warning my sister not to talk to you about their meeting." Pardee's face hardened. "You're making assumptions based on old paper and bad memories. Kyle Brennan's death was investigated. It was an accident. And your sister—" He stopped, seemed to choose his words carefully. "Your sister's disappearance was thoroughly investigated. If there had been any connection, we would have found it. Would you? Or did someone make sure you didn't look too hard?" He stood abruptly, throwing a few bills on the table. "I'm going to give you some advice, and I suggest you take it. Go back up your mountain. Keep living your quiet life. Don't go digging into things you don't understand." Is that a threat? It's a warning. From someone who's trying to keep you from getting hurt. He looked down at her, and for a moment she saw something in his face that might have been genuine concern. Or fear. "Let sleeping dogs lie, Greer, for your own sake." He walked out, the bell jingling behind him. Greer sat there, shaking with anger and adrenaline. The diner stayed quiet for another moment. Then gradually conversations resumed, lower than before, careful not to include her. Faye approached with a coffee pot. "You want something to eat, hon?" "Just coffee, thanks." Faye poured, her hand steady. That was bold, coming in here like that. Seemed like the direct approach was best. Maybe, but Vincent's not wrong about one thing. Some people in this town have long memories and short tempers. Faye glanced around, lowered her voice. You be careful, Greer. Things from back then, they've got roots deeper than you might think. Who should I be careful of? But Faye just shook her head and moved away to serve another table. Greer sat with her coffee thinking. Pardee reaction told her more than he probably intended. He wasn't just dismissive. He was defensive, scared even, which meant he knew something, or he'd known something 30 years ago, and buried it. She looked at the photograph again, at Kyle and Jolene and the unknown girl. Then she noticed something she'd missed in the dim lamplight of her cabin. In the background, beyond the carnival lights, was a banner. Alder Creek Mill, celebrating 75 years, the mill's anniversary party. August 1995, Greer finished her coffee and gathered the box and its contents. She needed more information, and she knew where to start. The library might still have old newspapers on microfiche, and the librarian, Hattie Drummond, had been working there for 40 years. If anyone remembered the details from that summer, it would be Hattie. But first, she needed to see the old mill. The drive took 15 minutes, following the logging road that wound through second-growth forest. The mill had been abandoned for 20 years, shut down after the Brennan family sold it to a corporation that stripped the equipment and left the buildings to rot. Greer had been out here once before, years ago, when she was still searching desperately for any trace of Jolene. The place had been spooky even in daylight. Empty buildings with broken windows, rusted machinery, weeds growing through cracked concrete. She pulled off the road where the chain-link fence had fallen down, grabbed a flashlight from the truck and walked in. The main building loomed ahead, 3 stories of weathered wood and corrugated metal. The old water tower Kyle had supposedly fallen from stood to the left, listing slightly, its tank streaked with rust and bird droppings. The ground was soft from recent rain. Greer picked her way carefully, watching for rotten boards and hidden holes. It was quiet here, the kind of heavy silence that comes from abandonment. Even the birds seemed to avoid the place. She found what she was looking for, near the base of the water tower. Fresh tire tracks, multiple vehicles, cutting through the weeds and mud. They were recent, within the last week, she'd guess. Someone had been here. Multiple someones. Greer followed the tracks to a cleared area behind the main building. Here, the ground had been disturbed more extensively. Patches of darker soil showed where something had been dug up or turned over. She knelt down, examining it more closely. Whatever had been here was gone now, but the effort had been recent and deliberate. A sound behind her made her spin around, heart hammering. But it was just a crow, landing on the roof of the building, cawing at her intrusion. She let out a shaky breath and stood. The place was getting to her, and the morning shadows were deeper here, blocked by the buildings and the trees. She walked the perimeter, finding more signs of recent activity. Cigarette butts near the fence, the imprint of boots in the mud, larger than hers, with a distinctive tread pattern. And near the old office entrance, a scrap of yellow fabric caught on a nail. She pulled it free carefully. It looked like it had come from a rain jacket or tarp, the kind people used to cover equipment. Someone was using this place, or had been using it recently. But for what? Greer pocketed the fabric and headed back to her truck, her mind churning. The note had said to meet at the mill at midnight. Kyle had written it 3 days before he died. Whatever happened at that meeting, it had set something in motion that ended with his death and Jolene's disappearance. And now, 30 years later, someone was back here digging around, looking for something or trying to hide something that had finally worked loose from the river bottom. She drove back to town slowly, thinking through what she knew and what she could prove. The box had been in the river, but she couldn't prove when it went in. The note suggested a connection between Kyle and Jolene, but it didn't prove anything about how they died. The fresh activity at the mill might be completely unrelated, kids looking for a place to party, or salvagers picking through the ruins. But her gut said otherwise. Her gut said that someone knew what was in that box, and when it surfaced after all these years, they'd gone looking for whatever else might be hidden at the mill. The library was in the old town hall building, a 2-story brick structure that also housed the mayor's office and the public records. Greer parked and went inside, her footsteps echoing on the worn marble floors. The library occupied the entire second floor, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked under her weight. Hattie Drummond sat at the main desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, her grey hair pulled back in its familiar bun. She looked up as Greer entered and smiled, genuine and warm. Unlike Pardee and the others, Hattie had never treated her like a burden or an inconvenience. Greer Manton. "It's been too long. Hi, Hattie. I need to look at some old newspapers." Summer of 1995, Hattie's smile faded slightly. "That's a specific request. I have a specific reason. I suppose you do." Hattie stood, moving with the careful deliberation of her 74 years. "Microfiche reader is in the back room. You remember how to use it?" "I think so." Hattie pulled out the drawer labeled 1995 and selected several reels. "These cover June through September. If you need anything else, just holler." Greer sat up at the reader and started scrolling. The first mention of Kyle Brennan's death was on August 18th. Local man dies in tragic fall. The article was short, almost perfunctory. Kyle Brennan, 26, son of mill owner Douglas Brennan, had died after falling from the water tower at the family's mill. No witnesses. Body discovered by a maintenance worker the following morning. Sheriff's office investigating, but foul play not suspected. That was it. For the death of the mill owner's son, the coverage was surprisingly minimal. Greer kept scrolling, found the obituary a few days later. Beloved son, community leader, survived by his father Douglas and brother Nathan. Funeral services at St. Andrews. In lieu of flowers, donations to the volunteer fire department. Nothing about Jolene. Her disappearance wasn't reported until a week later, and even then, it was a small article on page 5. Local woman missing. The facts, as reported. Jolene Manton, 25, last seen leaving her shift at Trudeau's Diner. Car found abandoned on Logging Road. Anyone with information should contact Sheriff's office. Greer sat back, staring at the screen. 2 deaths, or 1 death and 1 disappearance, within days of each other, and the newspaper had treated them as completely unrelated. Maybe they were, to most people. But looking at the photograph from the box, at Kyle's arm around Jolene's shoulders, Greer knew better. She printed both articles and kept searching, looking for any follow-up. There wasn't much. One more article about Jolene a month later, updating that the search was ongoing, but there were no new leads. And then nothing. Both stories had simply disappeared from the public record, buried under the usual small-town news about school board meetings and harvest festivals. "Find what you needed?" Hattie appeared beside her, quiet as a cat. "Some of it." "Hattie, do you remember that summer? When Kyle Brennan died?" Hattie pulled up a chair and sat, choosing her words carefully. "I remember. Do you remember people talking about him and my sister?" "No, but I remember people not talking about them, which is sometimes more telling." Hattie folded her hands in her lap. "Kyle was engaged to marry Angela Reed, the county commissioner's daughter. It was supposed to be the wedding of the year. And then he died, and your sister disappeared, and everyone just went quiet about the whole thing." "Why?" "Because the Brennans have owned half this county for 3 generations. Because Douglas Brennan had the kind of money and influence that makes people very careful about what they say out loud." Hattie paused. "And because Sheriff Pardee made it clear he didn't want speculation or gossip interfering with his investigation, which produced nothing. Which produced exactly what it was meant to produce. A closed case and a town that moved on." Hattie met her eyes. "I'm not saying Vincent was dishonest, Greer, but I am saying that sometimes people investigate just hard enough to avoid finding what they don't want to find." Greer showed her the photograph. Hattie studied it, then sighed. "That's Kyle and Jolene, clear as day. Where did you get this?" "From a box that surfaced in the river yesterday." "And you've shown this to Vincent?" "First thing this morning. He told me to let it go." "Of course he did." Hattie handed back the photograph. "The third person there, the girl laughing, that's Angela Reed, Kyle's fiancée. She lives over in Cooper County now, married someone else a few years after Kyle died. Changed her name to Mercer. That was new information. Greer tucked it away, already planning her next move. If Angela had been close to Kyle, she might know about his relationship with Jolene. She might know what happened that summer. Thank you, Hattie. Be careful, hun. If this box turned up after 30 years, it means someone put it in that river to begin with. And if they find out you have it, they might not be happy about that. It was the second warning she'd received in 3 hours. Greer nodded and gathered her printouts. As she headed for the stairs, Hattie called after her, "Greer, your sister was a good person. Whatever happened to her, she didn't deserve it." No, she didn't. Outside, the day had warmed up, but Greer still felt cold. She sat in her truck and looked at the photograph again, at the 3 young people who had no idea what was coming. Kyle would be dead in 2 weeks. Jolene would vanish a few days after that. And Angela had survived, married, moved on, which meant she might be the only one left who knew the truth. Greer started the truck and headed home. She had a lot to think about, and she needed to be somewhere she felt safe while she did it. But as she drove up the mountain, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That eyes she couldn't see were tracking her progress, measuring her threat level, deciding what to do about the woman who wouldn't let the past stay buried. At the cabin, Tip greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, and the familiar surroundings helped settle her nerves. But when she went to make coffee, she noticed something wrong. The kitchen window she always left cracked for air was closed, and on the porch, barely visible in the afternoon shadows, were boot prints in the dust. Large boots, with a distinctive tread pattern, the same pattern she'd seen in the mud at the old mill. Someone had been here. While she was in town asking questions, someone had come to her cabin, walked across her porch, looked through her windows, maybe tried the door. Greer's hands shook as she locked the deadbolt and checked that the shotgun was loaded. She pulled out her phone and took photographs of the boot prints, then checked every window and door. Nothing seemed disturbed inside, but the violation of her space left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She made coffee despite her shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table with her notebook. She wrote down everything she knew, everything she'd learned, every question she still had. And at the bottom of the page she wrote, "Someone knows I have the box. Someone knows I'm asking questions. Which means I'm getting close to something they want to keep hidden, outside." The afternoon shadows lengthened across the pines, and the river ran cold and indifferent through its channel, keeping whatever secrets remained in its depths. Greer didn't sleep well that night. Every sound outside, the wind through the pines, an owl calling, a branch scraping against the roof, pulled her awake with her heart pounding. She kept the shotgun propped against the nightstand and Tip on the bed beside her, which he seemed to understand was unusual and therefore warranted extra vigilance. By dawn, she was exhausted but wired. Running on coffee and determination, she needed more information, and she knew the library was only the beginning. If Hattie was right about the Brennan family's influence, then the official records would only tell part of the story. The real story lived in people's memories, in the things they'd seen but never reported, the connections they'd noticed but never spoken about out loud. After breakfast, she drove back to town. This time, she went straight to the county clerk's office in the basement of the town hall. The woman behind the desk was young, too young to remember 1995, and looked bored enough to be helpful. "I need to see property records and business licenses for the Alder Creek Mill," Greer said. Going back to the early 90s, the clerk pulled up the records on her computer, then printed out several pages. Greer took them to one of the research tables and started reading. The mill had been in the Brennan family since 1920. Douglas Brennan had inherited it from his father in 1978 and run it until 2005, when he sold it to Timbercorp International. The sale price was listed $4 million. Not a fortune, but substantial for a small-town operation. What caught her attention was a notation from July 1995. Environmental inspection pending. Forest Service compliance review scheduled. And then 2 months later, all violations cleared. Operations approved for continuation. Violations, the word jumped out at her. She went back to the clerk. Is there any way to see what these environmental violations were? Those would be in the Forest Service archives. We don't keep those here. Where would I find them? County seat, maybe. Or you'd have to request them from the federal office. The clerk shrugged apologetically. Could take weeks. Greer thanked her and left, her mind working through the implications. Environmental violations in July, cleared by September. Kyle died in August. Jolene disappeared days later. The timing felt significant, even if she couldn't yet see how it all connected. She sat in her truck and pulled out her phone, searching for Angela Reed Mercer. Found her on social media, a professional headshot, a cheerful bio about her work as a real estate agent in Cooper County. She looked good, well-maintained, the kind of woman who'd learned to smile through whatever life threw at her. There was a phone number listed for her business. Greer hesitated, then dialed before she could talk herself out of it. Mercer Realty, Angela speaking. Angela, my name is Greer Manton. I'm Jolene Manton's sister. Silence on the other end. Then carefully. I remember Jolene. I'm sorry about what happened. I need to talk to you about that summer. About Kyle. I don't think that's a good idea. I found something. A box that was in the river. It has a photograph of you and Kyle and Jolene at the Mills anniversary party. Angela's breath caught. Where did you say you found this? In the river near my cabin. It surfaced a few days ago. Another long pause. I can't talk about this on the phone. If you want to meet, it has to be somewhere private. Not in Alder Creek. I can come to you. No, there's a rest area off Highway 47, about halfway between here and there. The one with the scenic overlook. Tomorrow, 2 in the afternoon. I'll be there. Angela hung up without saying goodbye. Greer sat with the phone in her hand, feeling the weight of that conversation. Angela was scared. After 30 years, she was still scared, which meant whatever had happened that summer, its shadow still reached into the present. Greer drove to Walsh's General Store, the only real grocery in town. The place hadn't changed since she was a kid. Narrow aisles crammed with everything from canned goods to fishing tackle, the smell of old wood and coffee beans. Rennie Walsh stood behind the counter, reading glasses perched on his nose, working through a crossword puzzle. He looked up as she entered, and his expression shifted from neutral to uncomfortable. Greer, Rennie! She picked up a basket and moved through the aisles, collecting coffee, bread, eggs. Rennie watched her the whole time, not even pretending to work on his puzzle. When she brought her items to the counter, he rang them up in silence. But as he bagged her purchases, he spoke quietly. "Heard you were asking questions about your sister. Word travels fast. It's a small town. People talk." He glanced toward the door, making sure they were alone. "You should know that Vincent came by yesterday. After you left the diner, he was asking if I'd seen you, if you'd been in here. What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I hadn't seen you in months." Rennie handed her the bag. "But I'll tell you something else. Kyle Brennan used to come in here back before he died. He was a good kid, nothing like his old man. Last time I saw him, about a week before the accident, he was buying supplies. Camping gear, a new tarp, rope. Said he was going to do some exploring up in the National Forest. Did he say where?" "No, but he seemed nervous. Kept looking out the window like he was expecting someone to follow him." Rennie leaned closer. "There was talk back then, Greer. Not loud talk, but quiet talk, the kind people have when they're afraid to say too much. Talk about the mill cutting timber where it shouldn't, about inspectors being paid off, about Douglas Brennan having his fingers in pockets all over the county. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because Douglas Brennan employed half this town. Because Vincent Pardee was his fishing buddy and his poker partner. Because people have mortgages and families, and they don't risk those things on rumors." He straightened up as the door jingled, another customer entering. "Be careful, Greer. Whatever you're digging into, it's got teeth." Greer paid and left, her groceries in one arm, her thoughts spinning. Illegal logging, environmental violations, a son who was about to expose his father. It was starting to make a terrible kind of sense. She drove home, constantly checking her rearview mirror. Nobody seemed to be following her, but the feeling of being watched persisted. At the cabin, she unloaded her groceries and then pulled out the papers from the box again. The note, the photograph, the locket. She laid them on the table alongside her notes from the library, the property records. everything she'd learned. Kyle had discovered something about his father's business, something serious enough to warrant going to the authorities. He'd asked Jolene to meet him at the mill at midnight, probably to show her evidence, to ask her to be his witness. Don't tell VP, because even then Kyle knew the sheriff couldn't be trusted. But what happened at that meeting? Did they go? Did someone find out about it? Kyle died 2 weeks after writing that note. Maybe he'd already confronted his father, and Douglas had acted first. Or maybe someone else had been watching, listening, making sure the family's secret stayed buried. And Jolene, what had she seen? What had she known that made her dangerous enough to disappear? Greer's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Stop asking questions. This is your last warning. Her hands went cold. She took a screenshot, then called the number back. It went straight to voicemail, no greeting. She hung up and stood, moving to the window. The forest looked innocent in the afternoon light, just pines and shadows and the river running through it all. But someone out there was watching. Someone who had her number, who knew where she lived, who was getting nervous about what she might uncover. She should stop. The smart thing would be to pack up the box, drive it to the state police, hand it over to someone with actual authority to investigate. Let them handle it. Go back to her quiet life and her solitude and the safety of not knowing. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Jolene's face in that photograph. Saw her smiling and young and alive, with no idea that her whole future was about to be stolen from her. And Greer knew she couldn't stop, not now. Not when she was finally getting close to the truth that had eluded them for 30 years. That evening, she sat on the porch with a shotgun across her lap and Tip at her feet. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful and lonely. The kind of beauty that made you ache for someone to share it with. She thought about Dennis, wondered if he ever thought about her, about the life they'd tried to build together before grief drove them apart. Probably not. He'd remarried 5 years ago, had a stepdaughter, was living the life he'd wanted all along. The life she couldn't give him because she was too broken, too fixated on her missing sister. Maybe that was the real cost of unsolved mysteries. Not just the person who was lost, but everyone around them, frozen in place, unable to move forward, while the questions remained unanswered. Well, she was getting answers now. And tomorrow she'd meet Angela and hopefully get more. The night settled in, cold and clear. Greer went inside and locked the doors, checked the windows, made sure everything was secure. She fed Tip and made herself a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy. She wasn't hungry, but her body needed fuel for whatever was coming. At her desk, she opened her laptop and started searching for more information about Douglas Brennan. Found his business history, his civic involvement, his donations to local causes. On paper, he looked like a pillar of the community. Generous, involved, respected. The kind of man who got things done, but she also found mentions of lawsuits. Quietly settled, barely reported. A worker who'd been injured at the mill and claimed unsafe conditions. A neighboring landowner who accused Brennan of cutting trees on his property. A dispute with the Forest Service over logging permits. All of them resolved without going to trial, which suggested money changing hands. People being convinced to look the other way. The Brennan estate was about 10 miles outside town, according to the property records. A big house on 100 acres, bought in 1980. Douglas would be in his late 70s now, probably retired, living off the money from the mill sale. His younger son, Nathan, had left Alder Creek years ago. Greer found a carpenter's business listing for him in Cooper County, about 2 hours away. Different life, different name. Nathan had gone by Brennan professionally, but used his mother's maiden name, Caldwell, for his business. Interesting. A son who distanced himself from the family name, who might have his own reasons for wanting to understand what happened to his brother. Greer made a note to look into Nathan after she met with Angela. Between the former fiancé and the younger brother, she might finally get some real answers. She worked until her eyes burned, cross-referencing names and dates, building a timeline of that last summer. June, Mill's 75th anniversary party, where the photograph was taken. July, environmental inspection violations noted. August 14th, Kyle's note to Jolene. August 17th, Kyle dies. August 21st, Jolene disappears. September, violations cleared. Mill approved to continue operations. The pattern was clear enough. Someone had made sure that whatever Kyle had discovered stayed buried. And anyone who might have known about it, Jolene, maybe others, had been silenced. Greer saved her notes and backed everything up to a cloud drive. If something happened to her, she wanted the information to survive. Paranoid, maybe. But after the boot prints and the threatening text, paranoia seemed like common sense. She got ready for bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Every time she started to drift off, she'd hear something. A sound that might be footsteps, a shadow that might be movement. Tip slept soundly, which should have reassured her. Dogs knew when something was wrong. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed some invisible line, that by asking questions and showing the photograph and refusing to let it go, she'd marked herself as a threat to people who'd spent 30 years making sure the truth stayed hidden. Tomorrow, she'd meet Angela. Tomorrow, she'd start getting the answers she needed. And maybe, finally, she'd learn what had really happened to her sister on that August night 3 decades ago when everything changed. The morning of the meeting, Greer woke to rain. Not a downpour, just that steady mountain drizzle that could last for hours. She made coffee and stood at the window, watching water drip from the eaves, thinking about the drive ahead. 2 hours to the rest area, through winding mountain roads that would be slick with rain. She'd need to leave early, but first, there was something she needed to do. Something she'd been avoiding for 10 years. She drove into Alder Creek and took the turn toward the old residential section where she'd grown up. The house was still there, smaller than she remembered, the paint peeling and the yard overgrown. After their father died, she'd tried to sell it, but there were no buyers in a dying town for a house that needed so much work. Eventually, she just locked it up and walked away, unable to bear the memories it held. Now she parked in the driveway, the rain pattering on the truck's roof, and looked at the place where Jolene had spent the first 25 years of her life. The place where she'd gotten ready for school, brought home report cards, had her first heartbreak, dreamed about her future. All of it still inside those walls, preserved like a museum to a life cut short. Greer found the key on her ring and let herself in. The air inside was stale and dusty, but everything was as she'd left it. Her parents' furniture, the family photos on the mantel, the worn carpet that had seen decades of footsteps. She moved through the rooms, slowly, letting herself remember. In the kitchen she could see her mother making Sunday breakfast, her father reading the newspaper at the table. In the living room, she remembered Christmas mornings and birthday parties and the night they'd all sat together watching the news coverage of Jolene's disappearance, hoping for some word, some sign that she was alive and would come home. She climbed the stairs to the second floor. Her old room was on the left, Jolene's on the right. Greer went to Jolene's door and pushed it open. The room was frozen in time. Band posters on the walls, a bookshelf full of paperback novels. The bed still made with its faded quilt. Their mother had kept it this way, hoping Jolene would come back. And then, after their mother died, their father couldn't bring himself to change anything. So it had stayed, a shrine to a missing girl who would never grow older than 25. Greer sat on the bed and looked around, trying to see what she'd missed before. The sheriff had searched this room, back when Jolene first disappeared. He'd taken her journals, her address book, anything that might provide clues about where she'd gone. But Greer wondered if he'd really looked, or if he'd just gone through the motions. She started with the dresser, pulling out drawers, feeling along the backs and bottoms. Nothing. The closet was full of clothes from 1995, styles that looked dated now, fabrics that smelled of mothballs and neglect. She checked the pockets of jackets and jeans, found a few coins, a movie ticket stub, nothing significant. The desk was next. Jolene had done her homework here, written letters to friends, probably composed the diary entries that Pardee had confiscated. Greer opened each drawer methodically, checking for false backs or hidden compartments. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old school papers, her fingers found something loose, a board that shifted when she pressed on it. She pulled out the papers and examined the drawer more carefully. There, in the back corner, was a small panel that had been carefully cut and fitted back into place. She pried it up with her fingernail and reached into the space beneath. Her hand closed around something cold and metal. She pulled it out and found herself holding a silver compass, tarnished but still beautiful. On the back, an inscription: KB to JM forever, Kyle Brennan to Jolene Manton. Forever. Greer sat back on her heels, the compass heavy in her palm. This was proof of their relationship, something Jolene had valued enough to hide from their parents, from everyone. She'd kept it secret because she knew it would cause problems. Kyle was engaged to Angela. Dating the mill owner's son would have made Jolene the target of gossip and judgment in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. But she'd kept the compass, hidden it away in this secret spot where only she knew to look. Greer checked the rest of the hiding place and found one more thing: a folded piece of paper, the creases worn soft from being opened and refolded many times. She unfolded it carefully and recognized Jolene's handwriting. It wasn't a letter, just notes. Scattered thoughts written in her sister's quick, looping script. Kyle says his father is cutting in the protected zone. Says he has proof. Says we can stop it if we go to the Forest Service together. But what if he's wrong? What if Douglas finds out? Kay says not to worry, says he'll protect me. But I'm scared. I'm so scared. Below that, in different ink, added later, meeting him at the mill tonight, midnight. If anything happens, the evidence is in the second box. The one only Nathan knows about. The second box. Greer read the note 3 times, her heart pounding. Jolene had known about evidence, had known where it was hidden, and she'd gone to that meeting at the mill, knowing the danger, trusting that Kyle would protect her. But Kyle had died 2 weeks before that meeting could happen, which meant Jolene had gone alone, or someone else had been waiting for her. Greer carefully folded the note and put it in her pocket along with the compass. She checked the rest of the room, but found nothing else. Whatever other secrets Jolene had kept, they'd disappeared with her. Downstairs, she locked up the house and sat in her truck, looking at the compass. The inscription blurred as tears filled her eyes. Forever. They'd been so young, so sure that love could conquer anything. They'd had no idea what they were up against. She wiped her eyes and started the truck. She had an hour before she needed to leave for the meeting with Angela. Time enough to grab lunch and steady her nerves. At Trudeau's diner, Faye brought her a sandwich and coffee without being asked. The lunch crowd was thin. A few construction workers, an elderly couple, a man in a business suit working on his laptop. Greer ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Faye stopped by to refill her coffee. "You doing okay, hun?" "I'm managing. Heard you've been asking a lot of questions. Word really does travel in this town." Faye glanced around, then slid into the booth across from her. "Listen, I know it's not my business, but I worked with your sister that last summer. She waitressed here, same shifts I did. And I need to tell you something I never told anyone else." Greer set down her sandwich. "I'm listening. About a week before she disappeared, Jolene asked me if I knew any lawyers. Not local ones, but lawyers who handled environmental cases. Said she needed advice about reporting something, but she was worried about retaliation." Faye's voice dropped lower. "I gave her a name. Guy over in the state capitol who'd helped my cousin with a workers' comp case. I don't know if she ever called him. Did you tell the sheriff this?" I tried. "He said it wasn't relevant, that Jolene's work history showed no sign of problems." Faye's eyes were troubled. "But I've wondered all these years, if I'd pushed harder, if I'd made him listen, would it have made a difference? It wasn't your fault, Faye. Maybe not. But I've lived with it anyway." She stood, pulled a napkin from her apron and wrote something on it. "That's the lawyer's name, Thomas Casper. He's retired now, but maybe he'll remember if she called." Greer took the napkin. "Thank you. Just be careful. Whatever Jolene was trying to report, somebody didn't want it getting out. And if they killed once..." Faye didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Greer paid her bill and headed out to her truck. The rain had eased to a mist, the kind that soaked you without seeming to fall. She programmed the rest area address into her phone and started driving, her thoughts churning. The highway cut through dense forest, climbing and descending through the mountains. Traffic was light, a few logging trucks, some tourist cars, nothing threatening. But Greer found herself checking her mirrors constantly, looking for vehicles that stayed behind her too long, for patterns that suggested surveillance. The rest area appeared after 90 minutes of driving. It was a small pullout with picnic tables, restrooms, and a short trail to a scenic overlook. Only 2 other vehicles were parked there, a minivan with out-of-state plates and a sedan that Greer recognized from Angela's social media photos. She parked and walked to the overlook. Angela stood at the railing, looking out over the valley below. She'd aged well, kept her figure, wore expensive clothes that spoke of success. But there was tension in her shoulders, and when she turned to greet Greer, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming," Greer said. "I almost didn't." Angela's voice was tight. "After all this time, I've worked hard to put that summer behind me. I understand. But I need to know what happened. My sister deserves that." Angela looked away, back toward the valley. "Show me the photograph." Greer pulled it out and handed it over. Angela's hands trembled as she held it. "The Mills anniversary party, July 12th. I remember that night. It was so hot, and the carnival was packed, and Kyle was—" She stopped, swallowed hard. Kyle was different that night, distracted, kept pulling away to talk on his phone. "I thought he was being rude, but now I know he was worried about something. Did you know about him and my sister?" "Not then. I found out later, after he died. Found letters in his apartment, letters from Jolene. They'd been seeing each other since spring. He was going to break off our engagement." Angela's voice was bitter. "I was 23 years old, planning my wedding, picking out china patterns, and my fiancé was in love with someone else. I'm sorry, don't be. I was angry then, but I've had 30 years to understand. Kyle and I were wrong for each other. His father pushed the engagement because my father was the county commissioner. It was political, not romantic. Jolene was who he really loved. Did you know what he was investigating? About his father's logging operation?" Angela's head snapped around. "How do you know about that?" "I found evidence. Notes, documents. Kyle was going to expose illegal logging in the protected forest. He told me a few days before he died. Came to my house, told me everything. Said he couldn't marry me, couldn't live the lie his father wanted him to live. Said he had proof that Douglas was cutting where he wasn't supposed to, bribing inspectors, covering up violations." Angela gripped the railing. "I told him he was crazy, that he'd ruin the family, ruin everything. We fought, I said terrible things, and then 2 days later, he was dead. You think his father killed him? I think Kyle's death was awfully convenient for Douglas. The investigation went away, the mill kept operating, and everyone moved on." She turned to face Greer directly. "Your sister knew what Kyle knew. She was supposed to be his witness when he went to the Forest Service. That made her dangerous. Did you tell this to Sheriff Pardee?" "Of course I did. He said I was upset, that I was imagining conspiracies because I couldn't accept that Kyle's death was an accident. He told me to grieve quietly and let it go." Angela's laugh was harsh. "So I did. I moved away, married a good man, built a life. And I tried to forget that the man I almost married was probably murdered by his own father." Greer showed her the compass. "I found this today, in Jolene's room." Angela touched it gently. "He talked about getting her this. Said she loved old things, antiques. Said he wanted to give her something that would last." Her eyes filled with tears. "Forever." They really believed that. Jolene wrote a note. She mentioned a second box, one that only Nathan knew about. "Do you know what that means?" "Nathan. Kyle's little brother." Angela thought for a moment. They were close, despite the age difference. Kyle was 26, Nathan was only 16. But Kyle used to take him camping, taught him about the forest. They had places they went together, places their father didn't know about. "Do you know where Nathan is now?" "Last I heard, he was living in Cooper County. Became a carpenter, uses his mother's maiden name. He and Douglas haven't spoken in years." Angela pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I have his number. We talked a few years back, when I was selling a house and needed custom work done. He's a good person, quiet, careful. He might talk to you. She sent the contact information to Greer's phone. If there's a second box with evidence, Nathan might know where it is. Or he might know where Kyle would have hidden it. Thank you. This helps more than you know. Greer. Angela hesitated. Be careful. If Douglas finds out you're asking questions, if he learns about this evidence, he's an old man now, but he's still connected. Still has money and influence. And if he was willing to kill his own son to protect his secrets, he won't hesitate with you. They stood together at the overlook for another few minutes, two women bound by grief and unanswered questions. Then Angela walked back to her car, and Greer was left alone with the view and the weight of what she'd learned. She called Nathan's number. It rang 4 times before a man's voice answered, cautious and wary. Caldwell Carpentry. Nathan? My name is Greer Manton. I need to talk to you about your brother Kyle. Silence. Then quietly, how did you get this number? Angela Mercer gave it to me. I'm Jolene Manton's sister. Another pause. Where are you? Highway 47 rest area. Stay there. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up before she could respond. Greer stood at the overlook, watching the mist roll through the valley below, and waited for answers that were finally, after 30 years, beginning to surface. Nathan Brennan arrived in a work truck with Caldwell Carpentry painted on the side. He was in his mid-50s, with his brother's dark hair gone mostly grey and the same strong features softened by time and worry. He wore work clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, boots caked with sawdust. When he got out of the truck, he moved carefully, like a man who'd learned to be cautious about everything. Greer Manton. He extended his hand. His grip was firm, calloused from years of physical work. Thank you for coming. Let's walk. He gestured toward the trail that led deeper into the woods, away from the parking area and any potential listeners. They walked in silence for a few minutes until the sounds of the highway faded behind them. Nathan stopped at a clearing where a fallen log made a natural bench. He sat and Greer sat beside him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Nathan said, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to come asking about Kyle. Why didn't you come forward yourself? Because I was 16 years old and my father told me that if I ever repeated what Kyle had told me, I'd end up just like him, dead in a ditch somewhere, forgotten. Nathan's voice was flat, emotionless, in the way of someone who'd told themselves a painful story so many times it had lost its edge. I believed him. So I kept quiet. Went to college, moved away, built a different life with a different name. Tried to pretend I wasn't Douglas Brennan's son, but you never forgot. How could I? Kyle was my hero. He taught me to fish, to build things, to think for myself. And then he was gone, and I knew it wasn't an accident, but I couldn't prove it, and I was too scared to try. Nathan looked at her directly. So why now? Why are you asking about this after all these years? Greer pulled out the metal box and showed him the contents. The photograph, the locket, the note. Nathan's hands shook as he held the photograph. This was from the anniversary party. I took this picture, stood right there with Kyle's camera and snapped it. He touched the image gently. That's Jolene. Kyle talked about her all the time. Said she was different from anyone he'd ever met. Said she made him want to be a better person. The note mentions you. Says the evidence is in a second box, one only you know about. Nathan closed his eyes. 3 years ago, I went back to our old place. The fort we built when we were kids, up in the national forest about 5 miles from the mill. It's still there, overgrown but standing. I don't know what I wanted. To feel close to him again, I guess. And I found something. The second box. Yeah, Kyle hid it in the floor of the fort under a board we used to hide our treasures when we were young. He knew I'd remember that spot. Knew I'd eventually go looking. Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. I've carried this around for 3 years. Couldn't decide what to do with it. He handed it to Greer. Inside was a key taped to a note in Kyle's handwriting. Nathan, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I tried to do the right thing and it got me killed. The box is in the fort. The key opens it. Inside is everything you need to prove what Dad's been doing. Forest Service reports, payoff records, photographs of illegal cuts in the protected zones. Take it to the authorities. Don't let him get away with this. I'm sorry I'm leaving you alone with this burden. I love you, little brother. Kay Greer looked up at Nathan. You have the box. I have the box. I've had it for 3 years, and I've been too much of a coward to do anything with it. His voice cracked. Every time I think about going public, I remember my father's face at Kyle's funeral. Remember how he looked at me across the grave, like he was warning me. And I freeze up. Can I see it? Nathan hesitated, then nodded. It's at my workshop. Follow me. They drove in separate vehicles, Nathan leading the way through winding back roads to a property outside town. His workshop was a large pole barn, neat and organized, with the smell of fresh-cut wood and varnish. He unlocked a storage cabinet in the back and pulled out a metal box, identical to the one Greer had found in the river. He set it on his workbench and opened it. Inside were manila folders stuffed with documents, photographs, and a small tape recorder with several cassettes. Nathan pulled out one of the folders and opened it. Forest Service inspection reports from 1995. See these red marks? Those are protected areas. And these photographs show fresh stumps in those exact locations. Greer looked through the photographs. Clear-cut sections in areas that were supposed to be untouched. Logging roads, bulldozed through protected habitat. Tree stumps with measurement tags still attached. Evidence that was impossible to deny. And these, she pointed to another folder, payoff records. Kyle found them in Dad's office. Payments to a Forest Service inspector, to a county official, to the sheriff's office. All carefully documented because Dad was paranoid about having leverage if anyone turned on him. Nathan pulled out a ledger. See, monthly payments to Vincent Pardee, labeled as consulting fees. $5,000 a month for 3 years. The pieces were falling into place. Douglas Brennan had been running an illegal operation, cutting protected forest and bribing officials to look the other way. Kyle had discovered it and threatened to expose everything. So Douglas had killed his own son and made it look like an accident. And when Jolene started asking questions, when she became a liability because Kyle had trusted her with what he knew, she'd been eliminated too. There's one more thing, Nathan said. He pulled out a cassette tape labeled August 10th, 1995. Kyle recorded a conversation with our father. 3 days before he died, he loaded the tape into the recorder and pressed play. The sound quality was poor, muffled, but the voices were recognizable. Kyle's younger voice, passionate and angry. And Douglas, cold and measured. You're going to destroy this family, Douglas said. You've already destroyed it. You're breaking the law, Dad. You're destroying protected forest for profit. I'm providing jobs. I'm keeping this town alive by lying and cheating and bribing people. How is that something to be proud of? Pride doesn't pay bills, son. Reality does. And the reality is that the regulations are strangling legitimate business. I'm doing what needs to be done. I'm going to the Forest Service. I'm going to show them everything. A pause. Then Douglas's voice, quieter now, dangerous. No, you're not. Because if you do, you'll learn what happens to people who betray this family. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Think about your mother. Think about Nathan. Think about all the people in this town who depend on the mill for their livelihoods. You want to destroy all of that because of some trees? I want to do the right thing. Then keep your mouth shut and forget what you think you know. That's the right thing. The tape ended. Nathan ejected it with shaking hands. He killed Kyle. 3 days after that conversation, my brother was dead. And I've known it for 30 years, but couldn't prove it. Now we can prove it. Greer looked at the documents spread across the workbench. This is enough to reopen the case. Enough to get real investigators involved. Not local law enforcement that Douglas has in his pocket. Are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. My father will know. And he's still dangerous, even at 78. He's still got connections, still got money, still got people who owe him favors. I'm sure. Greer met his eyes. My sister died because of your father's crimes. Your brother died trying to expose the truth. We owe it to them to finish what they started. Nathan nodded slowly. Then we do this together. We make copies of everything, we get it to people who can actually investigate, and we make sure our names are on every document, so there's no way to make this disappear quietly. They spent the next 2 hours photographing every document, copying every file, making multiple backups. Nathan had a contact at the State Attorney General's office, someone he'd met through a community service project who'd given him a card and said to call if he ever needed help. Greer had the name of the environmental lawyer Faye had mentioned, Thomas Casper. By evening, they had 6 complete sets of evidence. One for the Attorney General, one for the lawyer, one for the Regional Forest Service office, one for the state police, and 2 backup sets stored in safety deposit boxes at different banks. We should deliver these in person, Nathan said. Tomorrow, drive to the Capitol, hand them over directly, make sure they can't be intercepted or lost in the mail. Agreed. I'll meet you at the bank at 9. We'll get the evidence secured, then make the drive together. Nathan walked her to her truck. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Greer, thank you for not giving up on this, for caring enough to push when everyone else told you to stop. Kyle and Jolene deserved better than they got. This is the least we can do. Yeah. Nathan looked back at his workshop, at the evidence that had sat hidden for decades. I just hope we're not too late. Greer drove back toward Alder Creek as darkness fell. She was exhausted, but energized, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. They had real evidence now. They had Kyle's voice on tape, threatening his father with exposure. They had documents that proved illegal activity and corruption. This wasn't just circumstantial anymore. This was solid, but solid evidence also made them targets. Once Douglas found out, and he would find out probably as soon as they started making deliveries, he'd act. The question was whether they could get enough copies into enough hands, fast enough to make themselves untouchable. Greer's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Miss Manton, this is Thomas Casper. Ray Trudeau said you might be calling about an environmental case from 1995. Mr. Casper, yes. Thank you for calling back. I have to tell you, when Faye explained what this was about, it brought back a lot of memories. Some of them not pleasant. Casper's voice was gravelly, aged. Your sister did call me. Late summer of 95, said she needed advice about reporting illegal logging activity. I told her to document everything, to contact the Forest Service, and to be careful about who she talked to, because these cases can get contentious. Did she say who she was reporting?
She didn't give me a name.
Said it was a local mill owner, someone with connections. Said her boyfriend had evidence but was afraid to come forward alone. Casper paused. I never heard from her again. And then, a few weeks later, I saw a news story about a missing woman in Alder Creek. I called the sheriff's office, told them about her contacting me. They said it wasn't relevant. Sheriff Pardee told you that? Yeah. Said they were investigating her disappearance as a personal matter, not a criminal one. Told me not to spread rumors that could hurt the family. Casper's voice hardened. I should have pushed harder. Should have contacted the Forest Service myself. But I was busy with other cases, and I told myself it wasn't my business if the local law enforcement didn't want my help. Mr. Casper, we have evidence now. Documents, recordings, photographs. Everything that was hidden 30 years ago. We're planning to bring it to the authorities tomorrow. Good. That's good. You want me to help with that? I'm retired, but I still have contacts. Still know who to call to make sure this gets taken seriously. Yes, please. We need all the help we can get. They made plans to meet in the Capitol the next day. Casper would review the evidence and help them present it to the right people in the right way. Professional, methodical, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Greer hung up feeling like the pieces were finally coming together. After 30 years of silence and unanswered questions, the truth was going to come out. Justice was going to be served. But as she turned onto the mountain road that led to her cabin, she noticed headlights in her rearview mirror. They'd been there since she left Nathan's workshop, keeping a consistent distance, matching her speed. She accelerated slightly. The headlights accelerated too. She slowed down. They slowed down. Someone was following her. Greer's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was still 15 minutes from home, on a dark road with no other traffic. Her phone was in the cup holder. The shotgun was back at the cabin. She was vulnerable out here, exposed. She made a decision. Instead of continuing toward her cabin, she turned onto a side road that led to a trailhead parking area. The headlights followed, but the parking area had security lights installed by the Forest Service to deter vandalism. Witnesses, even if they were just cameras. She pulled in, left her truck running, and watched in her mirrors. The vehicle behind her, a dark SUV with tinted windows, slowed but didn't pull in. It paused at the entrance to the parking area, idling. Greer grabbed her phone, ready to call 911. After a long minute, the SUV drove away. But Greer sat there for another 10 minutes, shaking, before she felt safe enough to continue home. And even then, she took a different route, checking constantly to make sure she wasn't being followed. At the cabin, she locked every door and window, loaded the shotgun, and sat at the kitchen table with all the lights on. Tip sensed her fear and stayed close, pressing against her leg. Outside, the forest was dark and full of sounds that might be innocent or might be threats. Tomorrow, she and Nathan would deliver the evidence. Tomorrow, they'd put everything in the hands of people who could actually do something about it. Tomorrow, the truth would start coming out. She just had to survive until then. Greer barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind through the pines pulled her awake with her heart racing. By 5 in the morning, she gave up and made coffee, standing at the kitchen window, watching the darkness slowly give way to grey dawn. Tip ate his breakfast and settled by the wood stove, but his ears stayed alert, swiveling toward sounds only he could hear. At 7, she showered and dressed in clean clothes. Practical ones, jeans, a warm sweater, sturdy boots. She packed the documents from the first box carefully into a waterproof bag, added the compass and Jolene's note, and secured everything in a locked briefcase she'd found in her father's old things. Physical evidence that couldn't be deleted or denied. Her phone buzzed. Text from Nathan. Meeting at bank at 9, still good. She replied, yes. See you there. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Last chance to walk away. Greer stared at the message. Someone was watching her communications, tracking her movements, trying to intimidate her into silence. Well, it was too late for that. She took a screenshot and forwarded it to Nathan with a message. They're getting nervous. His response came quickly. Good. That means we're close. She fed Tip, left him with extra water and food in case she was gone longer than expected, and walked out to her truck. The morning was cold and clear, frost glittering on the grass. Her breath made clouds in the air. She did a quick walk around the truck, checking for anything unusual, cut brake lines, tracking devices, anything that might have been tampered with during the night. Everything looked normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The drive down the mountain was tense. She checked her mirrors constantly, varied her speed, took note of every vehicle she passed. A logging truck heading up toward the timber areas, a minivan with a family, a contractor's pickup. Nothing that stayed with her, nothing that felt like surveillance. The bank opened at 8:30. Nathan was already waiting in the parking lot when she arrived, his work truck idling, steam rising from a coffee cup in his hand. He looked as tired as she felt. Any trouble? He asked as she got out. Someone followed me last night. And I'm getting threatening texts. Nathan's jaw tightened. Me too. 3 messages since midnight. All variations on mind your own business, and you'll regret this. Your father, or someone working for him. He's got plenty of people who owe him favors. Nathan drained his coffee and tossed the cup in a nearby trash can. But we're doing this anyway, right? Right. They went into the bank together. The manager, a pleasant woman in her 50s, set them up with 2 safety deposit boxes in different banks. One here, one in Cooper County. They secured 1 complete set of evidence in each location. Documented everything, got receipts. By 10 o'clock, they were on the road to the state capital, a 3-hour drive through mountain passes and into the wider valley beyond. Nathan drove his truck, Greer followed in hers. They'd agreed to stay in visual contact, but not travel together. Harder to target 2 vehicles than 1. The highway was busy with morning traffic. Greer settled into the rhythm of driving, letting her mind process everything that had happened over the last few days. A week ago, she'd been living quietly in her cabin, content with her solitude, resigned to never knowing what happened to Jolene. Now she was driving to the capital with evidence that could bring down a 30-year-old conspiracy, destroy a powerful man, and finally give her sister justice. It felt surreal. It felt necessary. It felt terrifying. Her phone rang through the truck's speakers. "Thomas Casper." She answered. "Mr. Casper, Miss Manton, where are you?" "About 2 hours outside the capital." "Good. I've arranged meetings with the Attorney General's Environmental Crimes Division and the Forest Service's Law Enforcement Branch. They'll see you at 2 o'clock. I'll be there to help present the evidence." His voice softened. "I've also reached out to some journalist contacts. If this is as big as you say, we want media attention. Hard to make evidence disappear when reporters are asking questions." "Thank you. That's smart thinking. I've been doing this a long time. I know how these cases can be buried if the right people don't pay attention." Casper paused. "Ms. Manton, I need to ask, are you certain about this? Once you make these allegations, there's no going back. Douglas Brennan will come after you with everything he has. His reputation, his freedom, possibly his life are at stake. I'm certain." "Good. Then I'll see you at the Attorney General's office at 2. Greer hung up and glanced in her rearview mirror. Nathan's truck was still 3 cars back, exactly where he should be. The landscape was changing as they descended from the mountains. More open, more developed, civilization creeping back in after miles of wilderness. They stopped for gas and a quick lunch at a highway rest area. Nathan looked anxious, checking his phone every few minutes. "My father called. Left a voicemail." "What did he say?" "Haven't listened to it yet. I'm afraid to." Nathan set his phone on the picnic table between them. "Part of me still wants his approval, you know. Even after everything, even knowing what he did. He's still my father. That's natural. But it doesn't mean you owe him your silence." "I know." Nathan picked up his phone, stared at it, then put it back down. "I'll listen later, after we've delivered the evidence. When it's too late for him to talk me out of it." They finished eating and got back on the road. The capital appeared on the horizon an hour later, a small city by national standards, but the biggest population center for 100 miles. Greer followed Nathan through increasingly urban streets to a parking garage near the government buildings. They met in the lobby of the Attorney General's office at 1:30. Thomas Casper was waiting, a tall man in his 70s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. He shook their hands firmly. "Good to meet you both. I've been reviewing the summary you sent. If the full evidence is as strong as you say, this could be one of the biggest environmental corruption cases in state history." "It is," Nathan said. He handed over one of the evidence sets. "Everything's in there. Documents, photographs, recordings, all original materials from 1995. Casper opened the briefcase and began reviewing the contents. His expression grew more serious with each page. "This is remarkable. Kyle documented everything." He looked up at Nathan. "Your brother was very brave." "Yeah, and it got him killed. We're going to make sure that means something." Casper closed the briefcase. "Let's go upstairs. The prosecutors are waiting." The meeting lasted 2 hours. 2 assistant attorneys general, an environmental crimes specialist, and a Forest Service criminal investigator sat around a conference table while Greer and Nathan presented their evidence. They played Kyle's recording of his confrontation with Douglas. They showed the payoff records, the forged inspection reports, the photographs of illegal clear-cutting in protected zones. The prosecutors asked sharp questions. "How did you obtain this evidence? When did you find it? Who else knows about it? Can you verify the chain of custody? Are you willing to testify under oath?" "Yes to everything." They were willing to do whatever it took. By 4 o'clock, the lead prosecutor leaned back in her chair and exchanged glances with her colleagues. "This is sufficient to open a formal investigation. We'll need to verify the documents, interview witnesses, build a comprehensive case. But based on what you've shown us today, I believe we have probable cause to pursue criminal charges." "How long will that take?" Greer asked. "Weeks, possibly months. These cases are complex. We'll need forensic accountants, environmental experts, testimony from retired Forest Service employees. But I can tell you this, we take corruption seriously, and we take environmental crimes seriously. Douglas Brennan will be investigated thoroughly. What about protection? Nathan asked. Once he finds out about this investigation, we're at risk. We can arrange for periodic welfare checks, maybe a protection order if there are direct threats. But we're not the FBI. We don't have resources for full witness protection. The prosecutor's expression was sympathetic. I recommend you both take precautions. Vary your routines, stay in public places, document any harassment or threats. Not exactly reassuring, but it was something. They thanked the prosecutors and left the office, stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight. Greer felt simultaneously relieved and anxious. They'd done it. They'd delivered the evidence to people who could act on it. But now they had to live with the consequences. Casper walked them to their vehicles. You both did the right thing. It took courage to come forward after all these years. I'll stay in touch with the prosecutors. Make sure this doesn't lose momentum. Thank you, Greer said, for everything. Your sister would be proud of you. Casper shook her hand. Drive safely, and be careful. They left the capital as evening fell, Nathan leading again, Greer following. The drive back was quieter, less traffic, the kind of twilight that made the world feel suspended between day and night. Greer's mind wandered to Jolene, to what she would think of all this. Would she be glad the truth was finally coming out? Or would she be worried about the danger her sister was now in? Probably both. They stopped one more time before the mountain roads, at a gas station on the edge of town. While Greer filled her tank, Nathan came over, his face troubled. I'd listened to my father's voicemail. What did he say? He knows. I don't know how, but he knows we went to the capital. He knows we have the evidence. Nathan's voice shook. He said, if I value my life, I'll call him back immediately. There are things I don't understand, things that could get us both killed if we're not careful. He's trying to scare you. Well, it's working. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. What if he's right? What if there's more to this than just illegal logging? What if we've stumbled into something bigger? Like what? I don't know, but my father doesn't scare easily, and he sounded scared on that message. Not angry, scared. Greer thought about that as she finished fueling up. Douglas Brennan had spent 30 years covering up his crimes, maintaining his position of power, living comfortably on the profits of his corruption. Now suddenly his past was catching up with him. Of course he was scared. That didn't mean there was some deeper conspiracy. It just meant he was finally facing consequences. But doubt crept in anyway. What if Nathan was right? What if they'd missed something important? She paid for her gas and walked back to Nathan. Listen, we've come this far. The evidence is in official hands. We've done what we set out to do. Now we go home, we stay safe, and we let the prosecutors handle it from here. You're right. I know you're right. Nathan looked at his phone again. I should call him back. Not to listen to his threats, but to tell him it's over. That he can't intimidate us into silence anymore. Do you think that's wise? Probably not. But I need to say it. For Kyle, for your sister. For all the years I stayed quiet because I was too afraid. Nathan took a deep breath. I'll call him from home, after I'm back on my own property where I feel safe. They drove the final leg separately, each lost in their own thoughts. The mountains rose around them as they climbed back into the high country. The air getting colder, the darkness more complete. Greer felt the isolation settling back in, familiar and almost comforting after the stress of the city. At the turn-off to her cabin road, she flashed her lights at Nathan in goodbye. He flashed back and continued toward his property. Greer wound up the mountain, her headlights cutting through the darkness. The familiar landmarks appearing and disappearing, the lightning-struck pine, the boulder with the faded graffiti, the narrow bridge over the creek. Home. She was almost home. But as she made the final turn onto her property, her headlights swept across something that made her slam on the brakes. A vehicle parked in her driveway. Dark SUV with tinted windows. The same one that had followed her the night before. And standing on her porch, illuminated by the single light she'd left on, was a man. Tall, elderly, but standing straight. Even from a distance, even after 30 years, she recognized him from old photographs and news clippings. Douglas Brennan had come to her home, and he was holding something in his hand that looked like a gun. Greer sat frozen in her truck, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel. Every instinct screamed at her to reverse, to flee, to get away from this man who'd killed his own son, and probably her sister too. But another part of her, the part that had spent 10 years alone on this mountain, the part that had survived grief and divorce and isolation, refused to run. She killed the engine and got out slowly, leaving her truck door open in case she needed to dive back in. "Mr. Brennan, you're on my property." Douglas Brennan lowered his hand, and she saw it wasn't a gun but a manila envelope. His voice carried across the distance between them, rough with age, but still commanding. "I need to talk to you. 5 minutes of your time and then I'll leave. You broke into my home. I waited on the porch. I didn't break anything." He gestured to the envelope. "Please, what I have to show you changes everything. Everything you think you know about what happened 30 years ago." Greer's mind raced. This could be a trap. He could be armed, despite what he was showing her. He could have people waiting in the woods around her cabin. Every warning she'd received, every threat, had been building to this moment. But curiosity won out over caution. "Put the envelope on the porch railing and step back." "Way back," Douglas complied, setting down the envelope and walking to the far end of the porch. Greer approached carefully, grabbed the envelope and retreated to her truck. She opened it with one eye on Douglas, ready to jump in the truck if he made any sudden moves. Inside were photographs. Old ones date-stamped August 1995. They showed the old mill at night, illuminated by vehicle headlights. And in those photographs was something that made Greer's breath catch. Kyle Brennan, alive, standing next to the water tower. And with him, not falling, not being pushed, but standing there alive, was Vincent Pardee. The sheriff was holding something that looked like an envelope or folder, handing it to Kyle. And in another photograph, a third man stood in shadow, his face partially visible. "Who is that?" Greer called out. "State Forestry Inspector Raymond Cole. He's dead now, died in 2010, heart attack." Douglas's voice was flat. "Kyle didn't fall from that tower, Ms. Manton. He was shot. Shot by Raymond Cole when he refused to hand over the evidence he'd gathered." Greer looked at the next photograph. A timestamp of hours later showed the same location, but now emergency vehicles were present. And Kyle's body lay at the base of the tower in a position that could have been a fall. "Pardee helped stage it," Douglas continued. "Made it look like an accident. They moved the body, cleaned up the blood, created the narrative everyone believed. But I knew. I knew because I had these photographs. How? I had security cameras at the mill. Cheap ones hidden because we'd had theft problems with copper wire and equipment. The cameras weren't obvious, and nobody knew about them except me. I reviewed the footage after Kyle died." Douglas's voice cracked. "I watched my son being murdered. Watched the sheriff I'd been paying to protect my business help cover it up." Greer felt sick. "If you knew this, why didn't you go to the authorities?" "Because I was implicated too. Pardee told me if I said anything, he'd claim I ordered the hit. Said he'd testify that I paid Cole to kill Kyle to protect the illegal logging operation. And he had evidence. The payoffs I'd made to both of them, the forged documents with my signature. He could make it look like I was the mastermind." Douglas's hands shook. "So I stayed silent. I let my son's killer walk free because I was too much of a coward to face prison. What about Jolene? What happened to my sister?" Douglas closed his eyes. 3 days after Kyle died, your sister came to the mill, middle of the night. She was looking for the evidence Kyle had told her about. She didn't know he was dead yet. We'd kept it quiet for a day while Pardee arranged the scene. She was digging around the office building when Cole found her. And Cole called Pardee. They had a problem. A witness who knew about the illegal logging and who'd been in contact with Kyle. Pardee made the decision. Douglas opened his eyes and they were full of tears. He killed her, shot her just like Kyle. Then he and Cole buried her body somewhere on the mill property. I didn't know about it until the next morning when I came in and found them using the backhoe to smooth over disturbed ground behind the maintenance shed, the ground Greer had seen recently disturbed. Someone had been digging there, looking for the burial site. Why are you telling me this now? Because you found the evidence. Because you're going to destroy me anyway, and I'd rather go down for what I actually did than for murdering my own son. I've lived with that lie for 30 years, and it's eaten me alive. Every day, knowing people thought I killed Kyle, knowing that my silence let his real killer stay free. Douglas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Vincent Pardee is the man you're looking for. He killed your sister. He killed my son. And he's been living comfortably on his pension, playing the retired lawman, while we've both suffered. Greer stared at the photographs, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd assumed, was wrong. Douglas was guilty of corruption, of illegal logging, of bribing officials. But he wasn't a murderer. Vincent Pardee was. Where's my sister's body? I can show you. There are landmarks, measurements. I documented it all because I was afraid someday I'd need leverage. Douglas pulled another envelope from his jacket. It's all in here. The exact location where they buried her. The photographs showing the burial. Everything you need to find her and bring her home. He walked down the porch steps slowly, like a man carrying a tremendous weight. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Ms. Mountain. I don't deserve it. I was a criminal and a coward, and my silence made me complicit in both murders. But I want you to know the truth. I want you to have justice for your sister. And I want the man who actually pulled the trigger to face consequences. Greer took the second envelope, her hands shaking. Why now? Why not 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Why did you wait until I started digging? Because I convinced myself I was protecting Nathan. He was just a kid when it happened, and I didn't want him targeted by Pardee if the truth came out. I told myself I was being a good father, keeping him safe. Douglas's laugh was bitter, but really I was protecting myself. My reputation, my comfort, my freedom, and I lost Nathan anyway. He saw through me, knew I was lying about something, and he left. Haven't spoken to him in years. He has evidence too. Kyle left him everything, the documents, the recordings, all of it. Douglas nodded. I know, Kyle was smart. He knew I couldn't be trusted to do the right thing, so he made sure Nathan would eventually find the truth. That's what finally convinced me to come forward. When I heard you and Nathan had gone to the capital, I realized my son had outmaneuvered me from beyond the grave. He'd made sure justice would be served one way or another, a sound in the distance, a vehicle approaching on the mountain road. Both of them tensed. Douglas glanced toward his SUV. That might be Pardee. I left him a message this afternoon, told him I was going to come clean, told him it was time to face what we'd done. You did what? Greer's voice rose in panic. I wanted to give him a chance to surrender, to confess. But if he's coming here, Douglas didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Greer ran to her truck and grabbed her phone, dialing 911, but there was no signal. There never was this far up the mountain unless you were standing in exactly the right spot. She cursed and looked at Douglas. Do you have a signal? He checked his phone and shook his head. Nothing. The vehicle was getting closer, maybe 2 minutes away. Greer made a decision. Get in my cabin now, both of us. They rushed inside. Greer locked the door and grabbed her shotgun from beside the couch. Tip was agitated, pacing and whining. Douglas stood in the middle of her small living room, looking lost and old. Nothing like the powerful man who'd controlled half the county for decades. Does he know you're here? Greer asked. I didn't tell him where I was going. Just that I needed to talk to you. Douglas sat heavily in her armchair. But he's resourceful. He was a sheriff for 30 years. If he wanted to find me, he could track my vehicle. Greer moved to the window and carefully peered out through the curtain. Headlights were visible now, coming up the final approach to her cabin. A truck, not an SUV. And when it pulled into her driveway and the driver got out, she recognized him. Nathan. She opened the door, relief flooding through her. Nathan, thank God, I thought. Nathan's expression stopped her. He wasn't alone. Vincent Pardee emerged from the passenger side, and he was holding a gun. Not pointing it at Nathan exactly, but close enough to be a clear threat. Miss Manton, Pardee called out. I need you and Douglas to come outside. We're going to have a conversation, the four of us. Clear the air, so to speak. Greer stepped back inside and locked the door. Her mind raced through options. The cabin had no back door, just windows that were too small to climb through quickly. Her truck was blocked by Nathan's. They were trapped. Douglas stood and took the shotgun from her hands. "Let me handle this. He's here for me, not you." "No, you're not going out there to be executed. Maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe it is. But not like this. Not by him." Greer moved to the back window. The forest was dark behind her cabin, but she knew these woods, knew the trails, the hiding spots, the way down to the river. "We go out the window, we run. We get to a place where we have cell service and we call for help. He'll shoot Nathan if we run. He'll shoot all of us if we stay." Greer looked at Douglas. "You wanted to do the right thing? Help me survive this. Help me get justice for Jolene and Kyle. That's how you make amends." Douglas nodded slowly. They moved to the bedroom window as Pardee called out again, his voice harder now. "I'm giving you 1 minute. Then I start shooting out your windows. Then I come in. And then this gets messy." Greer unlocked the window and pushed it open as far as it would go. It was small but manageable. She grabbed her coat, stuffed the envelopes Douglas had given her into the inside pocket, and climbed through. Douglas followed with more difficulty, his age and size making the squeeze tight. He scraped his shoulder on the frame but made it through. They dropped to the ground just as the first shot rang out. Glass shattered in the living room. Tip barked frantically inside. Greer felt a moment of anguish, her dog trapped in there, but there was no time. They ran for the tree line as another shot sounded, this one hitting the cabin's siding near where they'd just been. The forest swallowed them. Greer led the way, using memory and instinct to navigate in the darkness. Douglas struggled to keep up, breathing hard, branches catching at his clothes. Behind them, she could hear Pardee shouting, hear movement in the cabin. They ran for 10 minutes, stumbling over roots and rocks, before Greer stopped in a small clearing. Douglas collapsed against a tree, gasping. "I can't, too old. Can't run anymore. You have to. We're not far enough away yet. Leave me. Get yourself to safety." "Call the police." "I'm not leaving you." Greer helped him to his feet. "There's a trail just ahead. It leads down to the river. We follow the river to the road, flag down a car, get help." "Come on." They pushed forward. The trail was rough, steep in places, treacherous in the dark. Greer's lungs burned and her legs ached, but fear kept her moving. Behind them, a flashlight beam cut through the trees. Pardee was following, tracking them. And he knew these woods too. He'd been sheriff here for decades, had probably hunted these mountains his whole life. The river sounds grew louder. Greer could smell the water, cold and clean. Almost there, just a little farther, Douglas stumbled and went down hard. Greer grabbed his arm, tried to pull him up, but he shook his head. "My ankle, I think it's broken. Can't put weight on it. Try, please try." He tried and cried out in pain, collapsing again. The flashlight beam was getting closer, maybe 5 minutes behind them now. Greer looked at the old man who'd harbored a murderer's secret for 30 years, who'd let fear control him into silence, who'd finally found the courage to tell the truth too late to undo the damage. "Hide," she told him. "Find a hiding spot and stay quiet. I'll lead him away, then circle back. He'll kill you. Maybe, but he definitely will if we're both caught here." She pressed one of the envelopes into his hands. "If I don't make it, you give this to the authorities. You tell them everything. You finish what Kyle started. Promise me." Douglas took the envelope with shaking hands. "I promise. And Miss Manton Greer, I'm sorry. For all of it." She nodded and ran, making noise deliberately, snapping branches, disturbing bushes, leading Pardee away from where Douglas was hiding. The river loomed ahead, rushing over rocks, maybe 15 feet wide here and deep enough to be dangerous. Behind her, Pardee's voice. "I can hear you, Greer. There's nowhere to go. The road is miles away and you're alone in the dark." She reached the riverbank and stopped, looking for options. The water was too fast to cross safely at night. The banks were steep on both sides. She could follow the river downstream, but that would take her away from the road, deeper into wilderness, or she could stand her ground. Greer picked up a heavy branch and positioned herself behind a large boulder. Her breath came in ragged gasps and her hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. Pardee appeared through the trees, his flashlight scanning the riverbank. He was in his 70s, but he moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in uniform, who'd faced down threats before. There you are. He trained both the flashlight and his gun on her position. Come out from behind that rock. Why did you kill them? Greer called out. Kyle and Jolene. They were just kids. They were threats. Kyle was going to expose the whole operation. All the money we'd made, all the arrangements we'd built over years. One idealistic kid was going to destroy it all. Pardee moved closer. And your sister, she knew too much. She was going to keep asking questions, keep digging. We couldn't let that happen. We? You mean you and Raymond Cole? Cole was weak, panicked when Kyle confronted him at the mill. Shot him before we could figure out another solution. After that, there was no going back. We had to cover it up, had to protect ourselves. Pardee was at the boulder now, just a few feet away. And we did. For 30 years, we got away with it. Would have kept getting away with it if you'd just left it alone. I couldn't leave it alone. She was my sister, and that's why you're going to die tonight. Because you wouldn't let the past stay buried. Pardee raised his gun. I'm sorry. I really am. But I'm not going to prison. Not at my age. Not after everything. A sound behind him, a crack of a branch. Pardee spun around as Nathan Brennan emerged from the trees, holding a large rock. He swung it with everything he had, connecting with Pardee's shoulder. The gun went off, the shot going wild, and Pardee stumbled. Greer rushed from behind the boulder and swung her branch, hitting Pardee's gun hand. The weapon fell into the river with a splash. Pardee lunged at her, surprisingly strong for his age, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. She felt his hands close around her throat, squeezing. Nathan pulled him off, the two men grappling at the edge of the riverbank. Greer gasped for air and scrambled to her feet. The men were too close to the edge, the ground crumbling beneath them. She reached for Nathan, trying to pull him back, but Pardee had him in a grip and wouldn't let go. Then Douglas appeared, limping badly, leaning on a makeshift crutch made from a branch. He raised something, Nathan's phone, and spoke calmly. Vincent, I've been recording this whole conversation, everything you just confessed to, and I've got a signal. The state police are on their way. It's over. Pardee froze. For a moment everyone stood still, the river rushing beside them, the darkness pressing in. Then Pardee's face crumpled, 30 years of guilt and fear finally catching up with him. He released Nathan and stepped back, and the riverbank gave way beneath him. He fell into the water with a splash and was swept downstream, his arms flailing, his voice crying out. Nathan dove after him without thinking, grabbing for him, catching his jacket. Greer and Douglas helped pull them both back to shore, all of them collapsing on the bank, exhausted and soaked. Pardee lay there, coughing up water, defeated. I just wanted to retire in peace, he said. That's all I wanted. In the distance, sirens. Douglas hadn't been bluffing. The police were coming. Greer sat with her back against a tree, her throat aching where Pardee had choked her, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. Nathan sat beside her, equally exhausted. Douglas kept one hand on Pardee, not letting him move, ensuring he couldn't run or try something desperate. They stayed like that, the four of them beside the cold river, until flashlights appeared through the trees and state police officers came crashing through the underbrush. And finally, after 30 years of silence, the truth could be told. The state police took them all to the hospital first. Protocol, they said, after a violent confrontation. Greer's throat was examined, documented, photographed as evidence of strangulation. Nathan had bruised ribs from the fight. Douglas's ankle was indeed broken, needed a cast and crutches. Pardee was treated for hypothermia and minor injuries from his fall into the river, then immediately taken into custody. They were kept in separate rooms, interviewed separately by detectives who'd driven in from the capital. Greer told her story start to finish, finding the box, the investigation, the evidence, the confrontation at her cabin, Pardee's confession. Everything recorded, documented, witnessed. It was after midnight when they finally let her leave. Nathan was waiting in the lobby, his arm in a sling. Douglas was being transported to a holding facility. He'd confessed to the corruption charges and would be arraigned in the morning. Pardee was already behind bars. You need a ride? Nathan asked. I need to go back to my cabin. Check on Tip. I'll drive you. They rode in silence for a while, exhaustion settling over both of them. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving just the bone-deep weariness that comes after trauma. Greer's throat ached when she swallowed, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I'm sorry I led him to you," Nathan finally said. "He was waiting at my workshop when I got home. Had a gun on me before I even got out of my truck. Made me call you, pretend everything was fine. Then made me drive him to your place. It's not your fault. He would have found another way, maybe. But I should have fought harder. Should have warned you somehow. You saved my life at the river. That's what matters." Greer looked at him in the darkness. "Your father showed up at my cabin. Before Pardee did. He gave me evidence. Photographs from the mill showing Pardee and Cole at the scene where Kyle died. My father helped you?" He wanted to tell the truth about what really happened to Kyle. He's still guilty of a lot of things, but not murder. "That was Pardee." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Part of me wants to hate him for all the years of lies. But part of me is just relieved. Relieved that he didn't kill Kyle. That whatever else he did wrong, he didn't do that. I understand. They reached her cabin around 1 in the morning. The place was a mess. Windows shot out, glass everywhere, furniture overturned from when Pardee had searched it looking for evidence. But Tip was there, unhurt, going crazy with relief when Greer walked in. She knelt and held him, letting him lick her face, feeling his solid warmth against her. Nathan helped her cover the broken windows with plywood from her shed. They worked mostly in silence, the physical labor helping to process everything that had happened. By the time they finished, dawn was starting to lighten the eastern sky. "You should get some sleep," Nathan said. "I don't think I can. Every time I close my eyes, I see Pardee's hands around my throat. Yeah, I know that feeling." Nathan poured them both coffee from the pot Greer had started. "The detectives said they want us back tomorrow afternoon. More questions, more statements. They're excavating the mill property at first light, looking for Jolene's remains." Greer's hands tightened around her coffee mug. After 30 years, her sister was finally coming home. But the thought of Jolene buried all this time in that cold ground, while life went on around her. While Pardee walked free and Douglas lived with his guilt, it was almost too much to bear. "They'll want you there," Nathan continued gently, "when they find her. For identification purposes, but also, I think they understand you need to be present. To witness it, will you come with me?" "Of course." "We're in this together now." Nathan set down his coffee and looked around the cabin. "You can't stay here tonight, not with broken windows and everything. Come to my place. I have a guest room. You and Tip can get some actual rest." Greer wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence and her solitude. But the truth was, she was scared to be alone in this cabin where Pardee had been, where violence had erupted, where she still felt the echo of his hands on her throat. "Okay, thank you." They drove to Nathan's property as the sun came up over the mountains. His house was small but well built, a craftsman's home with careful attention to detail. The guest room was simple, a comfortable bed, clean sheets, a window that looked out over his workshop and the forest beyond. Greer slept for 4 hours, dreamless and deep. When she woke, she could hear Nathan moving around in the kitchen, smell coffee and something cooking. She showered carefully, avoiding the bruises on her throat, and dressed in clothes Nathan had left for her, an old sweatshirt and clean jeans that were too big but serviceable. In the kitchen, Nathan had made breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, orange juice. "Figured you'd be hungry. You barely ate yesterday." They ate together at his small table. Outside, the morning was clear and cold, autumn in full force now. Leaves turning golden red, the air sharp with the promise of winter coming. "What happens now?" Greer asked. "They prosecute Pardee. Murder charges at minimum. Probably get him for Kyle and Jolene both, plus conspiracy, evidence tampering, corruption. He'll die in prison." Nathan refilled their coffee cups. "My father gets prosecuted too, but his lawyer is already working on a plea deal. Cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. He's old, his health isn't great. He'll probably do some prison time, but not life." "And the mill? The illegal logging? That's going to be complicated. Most of it happened 30 years ago. Statutes of limitations apply to some of it. But there'll be fines, restitution to the Forest Service, environmental remediation. The Brennan family name is going to be permanently associated with corruption and environmental crime." Nathan's expression was resigned. Part of me feels like I should change my name entirely. Stop using Caldwell, pick something new. Start completely fresh, or you could reclaim the name. Use it to make amends. Your brother tried to do the right thing. You're finishing what he started. That means something. Nathan considered that. Maybe, I don't know yet. Right now, I'm just trying to process that the man I trusted to uphold the law murdered my brother. That my father, for all his faults, tried to protect me by staying silent. That the woman I just met a few days ago is braver than I've been in 30 years. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of living with questions I can't answer. That's a kind of bravery. Greer's phone rang. Thomas Casper. She answered. Mr. Casper. Greer, I heard about what happened last night. Are you all right? Bruised but alive. Thank God. Listen, the Attorney General's office called me this morning. With Pardee's confession on record and Douglas's cooperation, they're fast-tracking the prosecution. They want to make an example of this case, show that corruption and violence won't be tolerated no matter how much time has passed. Casper's voice was energized, professional. They're also looking at other cases Pardee investigated during his tenure as sheriff, wondering if there were other cover-ups, other victims. How many? Hard to say, but at least 3 other suspicious deaths or disappearances during his watch that were closed too quickly. They're reopening all of it. Greer felt sick. How many families had lived with unanswered questions because Pardee had been corrupt? How many people had never gotten justice? There's something else, Casper continued. The media is all over this story. Journalists from 3 states are asking for interviews. You and Nathan are being called heroes. People want to hear your story. I'm not a hero. I just wanted to know what happened to my sister, and that's exactly why people want to hear from you. You'd represent everyone who's ever lost someone and never gotten answers. You're giving people hope that truth can still come out, even after decades. Greer didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want reporters in her face asking her how it felt to nearly be murdered. She just wanted her sister back. Wanted to bury her properly, say goodbye, find some kind of peace. I'll think about it, she told Casper. Right now, I need to focus on getting through the next few days. Of course. But when you're ready, I can help coordinate the media relations. Make sure the story is told properly. He paused. Your sister deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim. And Kyle deserves recognition for trying to do the right thing. This is a chance to honor them. He was right and she knew it. But it was all too much, too fast. She needed time to process, to grieve, to simply exist without immediate danger or urgent decisions. After she hung up, Nathan said, He's right, you know, about talking to the media. If we control the narrative, we can make sure people understand what really happened. Make sure Kyle and Jolene aren't forgotten. I know. Just not yet. First, we need to find her. Need to bring her home. At 1 o'clock, they drove to the mill site. The place had been transformed overnight. Police vehicles everywhere. Crime scene tape marking off sections of the property. A forensic team with ground-penetrating radar mapping the area behind the maintenance shed. Media trucks lined the road outside the fence. Cameras pointed at the scene. A detective met them at the gate. Ms. Manton, Mr. Caldwell, we've located what we believe is the burial site. We're excavating now, very carefully. It could take several hours. Greer and Nathan stood behind the crime scene tape and watched the team work. Methodical, professional, treating the ground with the reverence it deserved. Each scoop of dirt carefully examined, sifted, documented. Rennie Walsh showed up around 2, bringing sandwiches and coffee that Greer couldn't eat but appreciated anyway. Faye Trudeau came an hour later, standing quietly beside Greer, offering silent support. Hattie Drummond arrived at 4, walking slowly with her cane, saying she'd known Jolene and wanted to be there when she was found. A small community gathering. People who'd stayed silent for 30 years out of fear or uncertainty, now bearing witness to the truth finally emerging. The sun was low in the sky when the forensic team leader approached Greer. His expression was gentle. Ms. Manton, we've found human remains. Based on the location and the personal effects found with the body, we believe this is your sister. Greer's legs went weak. Nathan caught her arm, steadied her. Can I see? Not yet. We need to fully excavate and document everything. But I wanted you to know.
She's been found.
And we're going to treat her with all the dignity and respect she deserves, Jolene. After 30 years of wondering, searching, hoping against hope for a different outcome. Her sister was here, had been here all along, just miles from where Greer had been living, while she waited in silence to be discovered. Greer let Nathan guide her to a bench near one of the buildings. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors as the photograph from the anniversary party. Kyle and Jolene, smiling and young and alive, unaware of what was coming. They deserved better, Greer said. Yeah, they did. Nathan sat beside her. But because of them, because of what they tried to do, people are going to be held accountable. The forest they wanted to protect is going to be protected now. Their deaths meant something, small comfort, better than no comfort at all. The forensic team worked into the evening, using portable lights when darkness fell. Greer stayed the whole time, watching, witnessing, refusing to leave until they'd fully recovered Jolene's remains. Around midnight, they finally finished. The team leader came over one more time. We'll transport her to the state medical examiner for formal identification and autopsy. But I want you to know she wasn't forgotten. You made sure of that. You brought her home. Greer nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Nathan drove her back to his place, both of them silent, exhausted, grieving. In the guest room, Greer finally let herself cry. 30 years of held-back tears, 30 years of unanswered questions, 30 years of living with a hole in her heart where her sister should have been. Tip climbed onto the bed and pressed against her, offering wordless comfort. And somewhere beyond the window, in the darkness of the mountains, the river ran on, cold and constant, having given up its secrets at last. The identification was confirmed 3 days later. Dental records matched. Personal effects matched. The medical examiner's report confirmed cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Single shot, close range. Death would have been relatively quick. Small mercy in a situation full of horror. Greer sat in the medical examiner's office and listened to the findings. Nathan beside her, both of them processing the clinical details of how Jolene had died. The examiner was kind, professional, gave them time to absorb the information. Asked if they had questions. Greer had 1,000 questions, but none that could be answered in a room like this. The prosecutor's office called that afternoon. They wanted to meet, wanted to walk through the timeline for the trial. Pardee had been formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, plus conspiracy, corruption, evidence tampering, and attempted murder for what he'd done to Greer at the river. He'd pleaded not guilty, which meant a trial. Meant Greer and Nathan would have to testify, relive everything in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Douglas Brennan had taken a plea deal. 20 years for corruption, bribery, and accessory after the fact to murder. With credit for time served and good behavior, he'd likely be out in 12. He'd be 90 years old. The rest of his life would be spent as a convicted felon, his legacy destroyed, his family name synonymous with corruption and cover-up. Nathan struggled with that. Struggled with the idea that his father would die in prison, that their last conversation had been full of accusations and pain. But he also understood that consequences had to mean something, that justice required accountability, even when it hurt. The media attention was overwhelming. News trucks camped outside Nathan's property, reporters calling Greer's phone constantly, requests for interviews, for exclusive stories, for the real account of what happened. Thomas Casper helped them navigate it, set up one press conference where they could tell the story on their terms, then politely declined everything else. The press conference was scheduled for a week after Jolene's remains were identified. It was held at the State Attorney General's office, with prosecutors standing behind Greer and Nathan at the podium. Cameras everywhere, flashbulbs popping, reporters shouting questions. Greer stepped up to the microphone, her prepared statement in her shaking hands. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces she didn't know, representing newspapers and television stations from across the region, all of them wanting pieces of her grief, her story, her pain. 30 years ago, my sister Jolene Manton disappeared, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. She was 25 years old. She worked at the local diner, loved to read, wanted to travel and see the world. She was kind and brave, and she didn't deserve what happened to her. She talked about finding the box in the river, about the investigation, about learning the truth, about Kyle Brennan, who tried to expose corruption and paid with his life, about Vincent Pardee, the man trusted to protect the community, who'd instead become a murderer to protect his illegal income. "This isn't just about my sister," Greer said, looking directly into the cameras. "It's about everyone who's ever lost someone and never gotten answers. It's about corruption that goes unchecked because people are afraid to speak up. It's about the importance of truth, even when the truth is painful." Nathan spoke next, his voice rough with emotion. "My brother Kyle was a good man. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. He tried to stop illegal activity that was destroying protected forest, and he was killed for it. For 30 years, I lived with guilt because I stayed silent. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to act. I won't make that mistake again." The questions came fast after that. How did it feel to nearly be killed? Were they angry at Douglas Brennan? Did they think other cases should be reopened? What did they want people to take away from this story? Greer answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't. The whole thing lasted 45 minutes, but felt like hours. When it was finally over, when they could escape to a back room away from the cameras, Greer collapsed into a chair and put her head in her hands. "You did great," Casper said, handing her water. "Both of you. The story is going to resonate. It's already trending nationally. I don't want to be a trending topic. I want my sister back. I know, but you've given voice to so many people who've experienced similar losses. That matters. Maybe it did. Maybe there was value in sharing pain, in showing others they weren't alone in their grief. But right now, Greer just felt exhausted and hollow. The week before the trial, Greer returned to her cabin. Nathan had helped her repair the windows, clean up the damage. The place felt different now, violated somehow. But it was still her home, still the refuge she'd built for herself in the aftermath of losing everything else. She sat on her porch with Tip beside her, watching the sun set over the mountains. The river ran below, the same river that had given up the box that started everything. She thought about cause and effect, about how one moment can change everything. If Tip hadn't barked that morning, if she'd ignored him and stayed inside, if the box had stayed buried in the river bottom for another decade or century, would the truth ever have come out? Probably not. Pardee would have died peacefully, his crimes unknown. Douglas would have lived out his days with his guilt. And Jolene would have remained missing, a cold case that nobody thought about anymore except for one sister who couldn't let go. But Tip had barked, and Greer had followed him to the river, and everything had changed. Her phone buzzed. "Text from Nathan. Trial starts tomorrow." "You ready?" She replied, "As ready as I'll ever be." Another text. "We'll get through this together." Yes, they would. Because they had to. Because Kyle and Jolene deserved justice. And the only way to get it was to see this through to the end. That night, Greer pulled out the photograph from the anniversary party one more time. Kyle and Jolene and Angela, young and smiling and full of life. She studied their faces, memorizing them. 30 years ago, they'd had no idea what was coming. No idea that two of them would be dead within weeks, that secrets would be buried, that decades would pass before truth emerged. But they'd also had no idea that their story would eventually be told, that their deaths would lead to accountability, to reform, to other cases being reopened, that they would become symbols of courage and the cost of speaking truth to power. Greer carefully placed the photograph in a frame and set it on her mantel, a memorial to the people they'd been, the future they'd deserved. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that courtroom. She'd face Vincent Pardee and look him in the eye. She'd testify about what he'd done, what he'd taken from her family, and she'd make sure a jury understood the weight of his crimes. She wasn't afraid anymore. Anger had burned away the fear, leaving only determination. Pardee had tried to silence Jolene 30 years ago, had tried to silence Kyle, had tried to silence Greer herself at the river. But silence was over now. The truth was out, and it was loud and clear and impossible to ignore. She slept better that night than she had in weeks. No nightmares, no waking in panic. Just deep, dreamless sleep that left her rested and ready when morning came. The courthouse was packed. Media filled the gallery along with townspeople from Alder Creek, some supporting Greer and Nathan, others still loyal to Pardee despite everything. The divide was visible. People who'd benefited from his protection sitting on one side, people who'd suffered from his corruption on the other. Pardee sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than he had at the river. Older, diminished, stripped of the authority he'd worn for so long. His lawyer was expensive, brought in from out of state, already making motions and objections before testimony even began. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen, sharp-eyed and thorough. She'd spent the past weeks building an airtight case, told Greer and Nathan that Pardee's confession at the river would seal his fate. But they still needed testimony, still needed to present the evidence properly. Greer was called first. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. The whole truth, nothing but the truth. Words that meant something when you'd lived with lies for 30 years. Chen walked her through, finding the box, the investigation, each piece of evidence. The photograph, the note, the locket, the compass. Kyle's recordings, Douglas's photographs from the security cameras. The confrontation at the cabin, Pardee's confession at the river. Every detail documented, every claim supported by physical evidence. The defense attorney tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggested she'd been obsessed with her sister's disappearance, that she'd seen connections that weren't there, that she'd manufactured a conspiracy theory to explain a tragedy. But Greer stayed calm, stuck to the facts, let the evidence speak for itself. My sister didn't disappear, Greer said clearly. She was murdered by the man sitting at that table. And he spent 30 years lying about it, covering it up, living free while my family suffered. That's not a theory. That's what happened. The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney seemed to recognize he'd lost that exchange. Nathan testified next, his voice strong despite the emotion underneath. He talked about Kyle, about finding the second box, about the evidence his brother had carefully preserved. About 3 years of knowing the truth, but being too afraid to act. About finally finding the courage to come forward. My brother died trying to do the right thing, Nathan said. I owe it to him to finish what he started. No matter how hard it is, the trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness, each one adding another piece to the story. The medical examiner explaining Jolene's cause of death. The forensic team describing the burial site. Douglas Brennan, brought from prison to testify about what he'd witnessed and hidden. Even Angela Mercer, who flew in to testify about Kyle's last days, about his fear and determination and love for Jolene. The prosecution rested. The defense put up a weak case, suggesting Pardee had acted under duress from Raymond Cole, that he'd been protecting the community from scandal, that his confession at the river had been coerced. None of it held water. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. Closing arguments came on the 4th day. Chen stood before the jury and laid out the timeline with devastating clarity. Vincent Pardee murdered 2 young people to protect his illegal income. He buried their bodies and buried the truth. He let their families suffer for 30 years. And when he was finally confronted with evidence of his crimes, he tried to murder again. This is not a man who made a mistake. This is a man who chose corruption and violence again and again for 3 decades. The question before you isn't whether he's guilty. The evidence makes that clear. The question is whether we as a society will hold him accountable. Whether we'll say that no one, not even a former sheriff, is above the law. The defense argued for mercy, for understanding the pressures Pardee had been under, for recognition of his years of service. But it sounded hollow after everything they'd heard. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Greer and Nathan waited in a conference room, unable to eat, barely able to speak. Tip wasn't allowed in the courthouse, so Greer missed his comforting presence. She held the compass instead, Kyle's gift to Jolene, a tangible reminder of what they were fighting for. When the bailiff called them back to the courtroom, Greer's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The jury filed in, their faces serious. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Kyle Brennan, how do you find?" "Guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Jolene Manton, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Some people cheering, others protesting, everyone reacting. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Greer felt Nathan's hand find hers, squeezing tight. "Guilty. On both counts. Plus all the lesser charges, conspiracy, corruption, attempted murder. Guilty on everything." Pardee sat motionless at the defense table, his face blank. Whatever he'd expected, whatever hope he'd held on to, it was gone now. He was going to die in prison, just as Nathan had predicted. Justice finally, after 30 years. Sentencing came a week later. Life without parole on each murder charge, to be served consecutively, plus additional years for the other charges. The judge's voice was stern as she delivered the sentence. "You were trusted to uphold the law and protect this community. Instead, you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. You murdered 2 innocent people and spent decades covering up your crimes. This court finds no mitigating factors, no reason for leniency. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, and that is exactly what you deserve." Pardee was led away in shackles. He didn't look at Greer or Nathan as he passed. Didn't acknowledge them at all. Just an old man shuffling toward a future of concrete and bars and the weight of what he'd done. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed again. But this time Greer was ready. She stood at the microphone with Nathan beside her and spoke directly to the cameras. "Today, justice was served. Not just for my sister Jolene and for Kyle Brennan, but for everyone who's ever been betrayed by someone in power. We were told to stay silent, to let the past rest, to accept that some questions don't have answers. We refused. And because we refused, the truth came out. I hope our story gives courage to others who are still seeking answers, still fighting for justice. Don't give up. Don't let people tell you to move on. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding truth. It matters." The questions came again, but Greer and Nathan had said what they needed to say. They walked away from the courthouse together, leaving the media behind, ready to start the long process of healing. The medical examiner released Jolene's remains 2 weeks after the verdict. Greer made arrangements for the funeral, choosing a plot in the cemetery overlooking the valley, next to their parents. It felt right, bringing the family back together after so many years apart. The service was simple, but well attended. People from Alder Creek came. Rennie Walsh, Faye Trudeau, Hattie Drummond, others who'd known Jolene or who'd followed the case. Nathan was there, and Angela Mercer flew in to pay her respects. Even some reporters came, keeping a respectful distance. Documenting the final chapter of the story, the minister spoke about loss and justice, about the long wait for truth and the peace that comes from finally having answers. He talked about Jolene's life, not just her death, the young woman who'd loved books and music, who'd dreamed of travel, who'd fallen in love with someone brave enough to stand up for what was right. Greer stood at the graveside and read a letter she'd written to her sister. "Dear Jolene, I'm sorry it took me 30 years to bring you home. I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention when you needed me. I'm sorry for all the time we lost, all the conversations we never got to have, all the life you never got to live. But I want you to know that your death meant something. Because of you and Kyle, corruption was exposed. Justice was served, and other families who'd lost hope got to see that truth can still win, even after decades. I love you. I miss you. And I promise I'll never stop telling your story." She placed a single white rose on the casket. Nathan placed one beside it in memory of Kyle, and then, one by one, others came forward with their own flowers, their own silent tributes to 2 young people who deserved so much better than they got. After the service, there was a small gathering at the diner. Faye had closed it to the public, set up tables with food and coffee, created a space for people to share memories and find comfort in community. Greer moved through the room, accepting condolences, hearing stories about Jolene she'd never known. A customer who remembered her bright smile. A co-worker who recalled her kindness. Small moments that added up to a life, however brief. Angela approached her near the end, her eyes red from crying. "I'm glad she's finally at peace. And I'm glad you got justice for her. Thank you for testifying." "I know that was hard. It was necessary," Angela hesitated. "I've spent 30 years feeling guilty that I fought with Kyle before he died, that our last conversation was full of anger. But being part of this process, helping to expose the truth, it's given me a kind of closure I didn't know I needed." "Me too." They stood together in companionable silence. Two women bound by shared loss and the strange path that had brought them to this moment. Then Angela had to leave to catch her flight, and Greer was left with Nathan and the handful of people who'd become her unlikely support system through all of this. As the gathering wound down, Rennie pulled Greer aside. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said 30 years ago. What is it?" "The night Jolene disappeared, I saw her, driving past the shop around 11 o'clock, heading toward the Mill Road. She looked scared. I almost stopped her, almost asked if she was okay. But I told myself it wasn't my business, that she probably had a good reason for being out that late." Rennie's voice broke. "If I'd stopped her, if I'd just asked, she might have told you to mind your own business and gone anyway. Or Pardy might have killed you too." Greer put her hand on his arm. "We all carry guilt about things we didn't do, warnings we didn't see. But the blame belongs to the person who pulled the trigger, not to you. Still, I wanted you to know. Wanted to apologize for not doing more. Thank you for telling me, and thank you for giving me the information about Kyle's camping supplies. That was one of the pieces that helped everything fall into place." Rennie nodded and moved away, unburdened at least a little. Greer understood that impulse, the need to confess, to acknowledge fault, to be released from the weight of silence. They'd all been silent for too long, and now the truth was like a dam breaking, everyone wanting to tell their piece of the story. The sun was setting by the time Greer and Nathan left the diner. They stood in the parking lot, neither quite ready to go home yet. The town looked different now, Greer thought. Smaller somehow, or maybe just less threatening. The secrets had been exposed, the monsters named and imprisoned. Alder Creek was just a town again, not a place of sinister mysteries and buried truths. "What are you going to do now?" Nathan asked. "I don't know. I've spent so long focused on this one thing. Now that it's done, I'm not sure what comes next. You could stay in the mountains, keep living quietly. I could, but I'm not sure I want to hide anymore." Greer looked at the town, at the mountains beyond. Maybe it's time to reconnect, to stop being the hermit on the hill and start being part of the world again. "That sounds healthy. What about you?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to visit my father in prison. I need to, I don't know, make peace with it all somehow. He's still my dad, despite everything. And I need to tell him about the funeral, about the verdict, about how it all ended. That's brave or stupid. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." Nathan smiled slightly. "But I think Kyle would want me to try. He always believed in second chances, in redemption. I owe it to him to extend that to our father, even if he doesn't deserve it." They said goodbye, promising to stay in touch, to support each other through whatever came next. Then Greer drove home to her cabin, Tip beside her in the passenger seat, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. At home, she sat on the porch and looked at the river below. The same river that had started everything, that had given up its secrets and set this whole chain of events in motion. She thought about chaos and order, about how one small thing, a dog barking, a box surfacing, could change everything. Her phone buzzed. Text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, assuming it was another reporter. But something made her open it. "Miss Manton, my name is Laura Brennan. I'm Kyle's daughter. My mother never told me about my father until recently, when the trial started. I'd like to meet you if you're willing. I have questions about who he was, what he was like. I understand if you'd rather not, but I thought I'd ask." Greer stared at the message, stunned. Kyle had a daughter, a child he'd never known about, born after his death. Another victim of Pardy's crimes. Another person denied a relationship because of murder and lies. She thought about it for a long moment, then typed a response. "I'd be happy to meet you. Your father was a good man who tried to do the right thing. He would have been proud to know you." The reply came quickly. "Thank you. That means everything." Greer set down her phone and smiled for the first time in weeks. The story wasn't over after all. There were still connections to be made, still healing to be done, still ways for something good to come from all this pain. The sun dropped below the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Greer sat on her porch with her dog beside her, and the sound of the river in her ears, and she felt something she hadn't felt in 30 years. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting or moving on. The peace of knowing, of having answers, of understanding finally what had happened to her sister and why. The grief would always be there. That kind of loss doesn't heal completely. But the questions were answered. The guilty were punished. The truth was known. And in that knowing, there was a kind of rest she'd never thought she'd find. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and figure out what came next. She'd start rebuilding relationships with people in town, maybe even consider dating again. Think about what the second half of her life might look like, now that the first half's unfinished business was finally complete. But tonight, she just sat in the quiet darkness and let herself feel the weight lifting. Let herself imagine Jolene somewhere at peace too, free from the cold ground where she'd been buried, free from the violence that had ended her life too soon. "I did it," Greer whispered to the night. "I found the truth. It got you justice. You can rest now." And somewhere in the darkness, in the space between stars and mountains and the endless flow of the river, Greer felt something like an answer, like a sister's voice saying thank you. Like forgiveness for all the years of not knowing, not acting, not being there when it mattered most. She sat until the cold drove her inside, until Tip nudged her hand, reminding her it was time for bed. And when she finally slept, she dreamed not of violence or loss, but of Jolene laughing at the summer carnival, young and alive and full of joy, living forever in the moment before everything changed. 3 months passed. Winter settled over the mountains, bringing snow that blanketed the pines and froze the river's edges into crystalline patterns. Greer spent those months in a kind of quiet rebuilding, not of structures, but of herself. She met Laura Brennan in December, at a coffee shop halfway between their homes. Laura was 30 years old, a teacher with her father's dark hair and serious eyes. They talked for hours, about Kyle, about Jolene, about the investigation and trial. Laura had inherited her father's sense of justice, his belief in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. She'd grown up not knowing him, raised by a mother who'd been too young and too scared to tell Douglas Brennan about the pregnancy. But now she wanted to understand who her father had been, what he'd stood for, what he'd died trying to protect. Greer shared everything she knew, everything Nathan had told her. She showed Laura the photograph from the anniversary party, the one where Kyle looked so happy and alive. Laura cried when she saw it, tracing her father's face with her finger, memorizing features she'd never seen before. They stayed in touch after that. Text messages, phone calls, occasional visits. Laura met Nathan, and the two of them formed a bond over their shared connection to Kyle. It was healing for all of them, finding family in unexpected places, building relationships from the wreckage of loss. Nathan visited Douglas in prison twice. The conversations were difficult, full of unspoken pain and tentative forgiveness. Douglas was diminished by incarceration, his health failing, his pride stripped away. But he was also honest in a way he'd never been before. He talked about his mistakes, his cowardice, the choices that had cost him everything. Nathan didn't absolve him, but he listened. And in listening, he found a way to let go of some of the anger he'd carried for so long. In January, Greer did something she hadn't done in a decade. She went to town not because she needed supplies, but because she wanted company. She had coffee with Hattie at the library, lunch with Faye at the diner, an afternoon browsing books at the small shop Rennie's daughter had opened. People greeted her warmly, no longer seeing her as the tragic hermit or the obsessed sister, but as someone who'd fought for truth and won. The Attorney General's office kept her updated on the other cases they were reviewing. 3 more suspicious deaths from Pardey's tenure as sheriff were being reinvestigated. 2 had been ruled accidents at the time, 1 a suicide. All 3 families had doubted the official findings, but had been dismissed. Now, with Pardey's corruption exposed, investigators were taking another look. It would take time, maybe years, but the possibility of more answers, more justice, kept Greer engaged with the process. She also started writing, not for publication, just for herself. A memoir of sorts, documenting the journey from finding the box to the trial's conclusion. She wrote about Jolene, preserving memories before they faded further. She wrote about her own transformation, from a woman hiding in the mountains to someone who'd found the courage to demand truth. The writing helped her process everything that had happened, helped her find meaning in the pain. In February, on what would have been Jolene's 56th birthday, Greer visited the cemetery. She brought fresh flowers and stood in the snow looking at the headstone. Jolene Manton, 1970-1995, beloved daughter and sister. Her truth lives on. Nathan had suggested that last line, and Greer had agreed. Because it was Jolene's truth. Her relationship with Kyle, their shared determination to expose corruption, their refusal to stay silent, that had ultimately led to justice. Their story had inspired others to come forward, to reopen old questions, to refuse to accept convenient lies. "Happy birthday, Joe," Greer said quietly. "I wish you were here. Wish we could celebrate together, grow old together, be the sisters we were supposed to be. But since we can't, I'm going to live enough for both of us. I'm going to stay connected, stay engaged, make sure your story keeps meaning something." The wind whispered through the pines, and snow drifted down in lazy spirals. Greer stood there until her feet were numb from cold, then walked back to her truck, where Tip waited patiently. By March, the snow was beginning to melt. Spring was coming, bringing with it the promise of renewal. Greer woke one morning to the sound of the river running high, with snowmelt, loud and powerful and alive. She made coffee and stood at her window watching the water rush past, remembering the grey October morning when Tip had found the box. So much had changed since then. She'd changed. No longer the isolated woman living in self-imposed exile. She had friends now, connections, a support system. She had purpose beyond just surviving. She was part of a community again, contributing to something larger than her own grief. The state had established a memorial at the old mill site. A simple stone marker honoring Kyle and Jolene, acknowledging their courage and the price they'd paid for trying to do the right thing. It also served as a reminder about the importance of protecting wilderness, of holding the powerful accountable, of never accepting easy answers when the truth is more complicated. Greer visited the memorial on the anniversary of finding the box. She brought flowers and stood in the spring sunshine, looking at the names carved in stone. Kyle Brennan and Jolene Manton. 2 people who deserved long lives, whose futures had been stolen by greed and violence. But their deaths hadn't been meaningless. Their story had changed things, opened eyes, inspired action. Nathan joined her there, bringing his own flowers. They stood together in silence, remembering. Then Nathan spoke. "Laura wants to organize a scholarship, in Kyle's name, for students studying environmental science or forestry. She's been working with the community college, and they're interested. That's wonderful." Jolene would have loved that. She always believed in education, in giving people opportunities. We could do something similar for her. A scholarship for young women pursuing careers in environmental law or advocacy. Make sure their names are attached to something positive, something that helps future generations. Greer felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, let's do that. Let's make sure they're remembered not just for how they died, but for what they believed in. They worked on the scholarship foundation through the spring, set up the legal structure, established the funding, created selection criteria. The first scholarships would be awarded in the fall, one in Kyle's name, one in Jolene's. 2 students each year chosen for their commitment to environmental protection and social justice. Small acts of remembrance that would ripple forward, creating new stories, new possibilities. In April, Greer got a call from Thomas Casper. "I wanted you to know, the Forest Service has officially reopened its investigation into illegal logging in the protected zone. They're conducting a full audit, looking at all permits issued during that period. Your sister's case has triggered the most comprehensive review of Forest Service practices in this region in decades. Will it make a difference?" "Already has. New protocols, new oversight, whistleblower protections. It won't bring back the trees that were cut or the people who were killed, but it will make it harder for it to happen again." Casper paused. "You and Nathan did something remarkable, Greer. You took personal tragedy and turned it into systemic change. That's the definition of making something matter." After they hung up, Greer sat with that thought. Systemic change. It seemed too grand, too abstract for what she'd done. She'd just been looking for her sister, trying to understand what happened. But maybe that was how change always happened. One person refusing to accept injustice, refusing to stay silent, refusing to let the powerful write the final version of events. Summer came, and with it, the return of tourists to the mountains. Hikers on the trails, families camping by the river, people seeking the peace and beauty that had drawn Greer here a decade ago. She watched them from her porch, felt less separate from them now. They were all just people trying to find their way, trying to make sense of the world, trying to connect with something larger than themselves. On a warm June evening, Greer hosted a dinner at her cabin. Nathan came, and Laura and Angela, who was visiting for the weekend. Faye brought food from the diner, Rennie brought wine, Hattie brought stories. They sat on the porch as the sun set, talking and laughing, sharing memories of Kyle and Jolene, but also sharing their own lives, their own hopes and plans. It felt right. A community formed not by proximity, but by shared experience, by having survived something difficult together and come out the other side stronger. These people understood her in ways most never would. They'd walked through the fire with her and emerged holding on to each other. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Nathan lingered. "You seem happy," he said. "I am. Not in spite of everything that happened, but maybe because of it. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. Going through something that hard, surviving it, making sure it meant something, that changes you, makes you appreciate things you took for granted before. Exactly. Greer looked at the mountains, dark shapes against the twilight sky. "I spent 10 years hiding up here, convinced that isolation was safety. But isolation is just another kind of prison. Connection is what makes life worth living, community purpose, knowing that your life touches other lives and matters." Nathan smiled. "Kyle would have liked you." "He was always saying things like that, always pushing me to be more engaged, more involved. I used to think he was naive. Now I think he was right." After Nathan left, Greer sat alone with Tip, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, not just the physical journey up the mountain 10 years ago, but the emotional one, from grief to isolation to determination to justice to peace. It had been long and painful and often terrifying, but she'd walked it, she'd survived it, and she'd come out the other side as someone she actually liked, someone who'd faced her worst fears and refused to be broken by them. The river ran below, eternal and unchanging, yet constantly moving. A paradox, like grief itself, always there but always flowing forward, carrying pieces of the past into the future. The river had given up its secrets, and those secrets had changed everything. But the river itself kept flowing, indifferent to human drama, following its ancient path from the high mountains to the distant sea. Greer went inside and looked at the photograph on her mantel. Kyle and Jolene, forever young, forever frozen in that moment of happiness before tragedy struck. She touched the frame gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being brave, for trying, for showing me that truth matters even when it's dangerous, even when it costs everything. You gave me a purpose when I'd lost mine. You gave me courage when I'd forgotten I had any." And you gave me back my life just by refusing to let yours be forgotten. She turned off the lights and went to bed, Tip curled at her feet, the cabin quiet and safe around her. Tomorrow she'd wake up and figure out what came next. Maybe she'd write more, or volunteer at the library, or help Faye at the diner. Maybe she'd hike the trails she'd been avoiding, or finally take that trip to the coast she'd been dreaming about. The future was open now, full of possibilities she'd stopped letting herself imagine, but tonight she slept peacefully. No nightmares, no guilt, no unanswered questions gnawing at her peace. Just the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who'd carried a heavy burden for a very long time, and finally been allowed to set it down. Outside, the river ran through the darkness, and high above, stars wheeled across the infinite sky. And somewhere in the space between earth and heaven, two souls rested at last, their story told, their truth known, their legacy secure in the hearts of those who'd loved them and fought for them and refused to let them be forgotten. The end.